Chapter 24-21. Do you think you can change anything just because you're here? This isn't your martial soul mountain, where you can do whatever you want, the leader of the Radiant St. Hall growled. Even if I can't change anything, I can keep your Radiant St. Hall busy at the very least so that you can't harm the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage, Hun Zong chuckled. Afterwards, he glanced past the peak experts gathered there. He remained calm and showed no fear at all. He clasped his fist and said, "Everyone, Jianshun is the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage. I hope you can give our martial soul lineage some face and not harm Jianshun. We only want the Inata Tower. We won't make things difficult for him if he hands over the Inata Tower. Hun Zong, your martial soul lineage can take him away, but you can't take the Inata Tower away. That's right. We can give our martial soul lineage some face. You can take him away, but you have to leave the Inata Tower behind." The peak experts gathered there all called out. They were determined. Even though Hun Zhang's cultivation was nothing in their eyes, they dared not underestimate Hun Zong at all. Instead, a few peak experts even showed a sliver of fear in their eyes. Jianshan remained composed as he was surrounded. He watched on coldly as the light in his eyes flickered. He could already tell from how these people treated Hun Zong that even though the martial soul lineage could not produce grand primes, they were not as weak as he had imagined them to be. Hun Zong, in particular, seemed to pose a greater threat than the leader of the Radiant St. Hall, even though Hun Zong possessed the lowest cultivation out of all of them. "Jianshun, are you willing to give up on the Inata Tower? I'll take you away and return to the Martial Soul Mountain. That's the true home of our martial soul lineage," Hun Zong said at this moment. He looked at Jianshun cautiously and asked for Jianshun's opinion. "Leave behind what you obtained from the Tower of Radiance, or don't even think about leaving the desolate plain," the leader of the Radiant St. Hall said firmly. He left no room for negotiation. The Grand Supreme level technique was the highest inheritance of the Light Palace, and he could not afford to lose it. He had to take it back at all costs. "Yu Chun, your tone is getting more and more arrogant. If I want to take Jianshun away, do you think you can stop me? Let alone the fact that you can't stop him. Even if you really end up fighting, who knows who will emerge victorious in the end?" Hun Zong stared at the leader of the Radiant St. Hall in a mocking manner. "You're welcome to try." The leader of the Radiant St. Hall's eyes turned cold as he gave off a powerful presence. He did not back down at all. "Senior Hun Zong, you should go back. I obtained the Inata Tower from a lower world and brought it to the Saint's world. I won't just hand it over. Even if the Inata Tower is returned to the heavenly palace of Bishing, it should be returned by me personally," Jianshan said at this moment. He was very indifferent and composed. Hearing this, the eyes of the top experts gathered here turned cold. Even Hun Zong of the martial soul lineage was taken aback. He stared at Jianshan deeply and only asked after a while of thought, "Have you really decided not to give up on the Inata Tower?" "I won't." Jianshan was determined. "All right, I respect your choice," Hun Zong nodded. With that, his eyes suddenly became pitch black, like two black holes that could devour all light in the world. Extremely powerful martial soul force shot out from his eyes, piercing through space as invisible swords and shooting towards all the peak experts gathered here. Martial soul force was a wondrous and unique power formed from the combination of fighters and Radiant Saint Masters. It was extremely powerful and specialized in harming the souls of people. It was invisible and difficult to sense, making it impossible to guard against. The top experts who were gathered here were constantly on guard against their surroundings, carefully guarding against everyone who was present. However, before martial soul force, no matter how cautious they were, it was useless. This was because they were unable to guard against martial soul force. Even if they discovered it, they could only dodge it beforehand. If they could not dodge it, they could only endure it forcefully. Martial soul force was invisible. It could pierce through all matter, let alone their protective energy. Even god artifacts of lower quality were unable to block it before Hun Zhang's powerful martial soul force. Immediately, all the peak experts in the surroundings were affected. Under the influence of Hun Zhang's martial soul force, they became momentarily dazed. They were all very powerful. Their souls were like scorching flames, so Hun Zhang's martial soul force struggled to injure any of them as it dispersed. However, it was enough to affect them for a split second. Since you're unwilling to give up on the Inata Tower, let's take it back to the martial soul mountain. Jianshun, you're right. You obtained the Inata Tower in a lower world. Since you can control it, it's your fortune. Why should you give it to someone else? Hun Zong laughed aloud. He had already arrived beside Jianshun. He wanted to take Jianshun away while everyone was distracted. When Hun Zong struck out, a tremendous mountain that seemed to be able to crush the world silently appeared in outer space. It hovered there strangely. The mountain was not tangible. Instead, it was an illusionary shadow. It seemed like a projection. In this illusory mountain, there were 6 figures sitting cross-legged. All of them had expressionless expressions like old monks in meditation, and their bodies emitted auras that varied in strength. To no surprise, one of them was Aoyama. To no surprise, the illusionary mountain was the famed martial soul mountain of the Saint's world. However, it was only a shadow of the martial soul mountain. Jianshun, all the brothers of our martial soul lineage have moved out for you. Let's go. Come with me to the martial soul mountain. As long as we make it to the martial soul mountain, these people won't be able to do anything to you. Hun Zong chuckled fearlessly as if he was not worried about offending all the peak experts at all. However, just when Hun Zong was about to take Jianshun away, space suddenly ripped open and a shriveled hand extended out. It possessed the truths of the world, pressing towards Hun Zong along the trajectory of the ways. Hun Zong immediately became extremely stern. At that critical moment, his presence suddenly changed, as if he had established some sort of connection with the illusionary mountain in outer space. He also struck out with his hand, colliding loudly with the shriveled hand that extended out from the spatial crack. The 2 palms collided, but it was not as intense as expected. Everything seemed to be as light as the wind and clouds. The 2 of them had purposefully concealed their energy. Otherwise, with their strength, the storm of energy from this clash would have been enough to flatten the entire city. Hun Zhang's body suddenly shuddered, and he staggered backwards uncontrollably. At the same time, the illusory mountain that hovered in the air outside the desolate state also trembled slightly. The originally illusory mountain seemed to become even more illusory. Chapter 24-22. The peak experts who had been affected by Hun Zhang's martial soul force had all recovered now. They could no longer be bothered to settle their debts with Hun Zhang. They all stared at the old man who had suddenly appeared with ugly expressions. Ignoring the old man's personal strength, just the heaven-splitting clan behind him was enough to suffocate everyone present. This was all because of the heaven-splitting ancestor of the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting ancestor was one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalt. He was at the same level of cultivation as the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. They were both figures who were revered by people in the current saint's world. They had gone to great lengths to obtain the Inata Tower, just so they could return it to the heavenly palace of Bishing and obtain some merit so that they could establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bishing. Yet now, the heaven-splitting clan had suddenly appeared and wanted to take away Jianshun. All the peak experts present sensed that something was wrong. They could not afford to offend the heaven-splitting clan. Even Hun Zhang's heart sank when he heard about the heaven-splitting clan. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall also sensed that something was wrong. Jianshun possessed a Grand Exalt's cultivation method. He could not allow the cultivation method to end up in the hands of the martial soul lineage. However, the heaven-splitting clan's interference made him feel powerless. Does your heaven-splitting clan want the Inata Tower as well? A peak expert frowned. He was unwilling to accept this. In order to find Jianshun, they had spent a great deal of effort, turning the entire desolate plain upside down. Now that they had finally found him, the heaven-splitting clan had suddenly appeared and wanted to take away Jianshun. Were they not just wasting all their efforts over the past few years? They were just going to benefit someone else in the end. This caused all of them to feel resentment in their hearts. The old man snorted coldly. His voice was filled with disdain. He said, "It's just a damaged god artifact. How can our heaven-splitting clan take it seriously? Old man has only come under master's orders to take away Jianshan. You can fight over the tower however you want. Hearing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, they felt a wave of shock in their hearts. Their gazes towards Jianshan became complicated. They naturally knew who the master the old man spoke of was. Apart from the legendary heaven-splitting ancestor, who else could make such a powerful peak expert refer to him as master? On the other hand, Jianshan was just a mere divine king, yet the heaven-splitting ancestor had personally paid attention to him. He had even personally sent an expert to protect him. Regardless of why the heaven-splitting ancestor protected Jianshan, what was certain was that once news of this spread, anyone who wanted to touch Jianshan would have to carefully consider the consequences. Jianshan, give them the Enita Tower, and then return to the heaven-splitting clan with Old Man. If you can obtain master support, there's no need for you to go through so much trouble to establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bishing. The old man from the heaven-splitting clan said to Jianshan. Jianshan said sternly, "This junior is very confused. This junior has nothing to do with the heaven-splitting clan, nor do I know the heaven-splitting ancestor. May I ask why the heaven-splitting ancestor wants me to return to the heaven-splitting clan? You'll naturally understand once you arrive at the heaven-splitting clan," said the old man from the heaven-splitting clan. "Humph. Unless the heaven-splitting ancestor personally comes, don't even think about taking away Jianshan," Han Zong yelled out loudly. At this moment, Han Zong bellowed out. He suddenly shone with dazzling light. At that moment, he seemed to have fused with the martial soul mountain in outer space. Their powers had completely fused together. It was not just that. The six figures seated on the martial soul mountain in outer space shone with the same light as Han Zong. Their vital energies and all their powers seemed to have completely fused together at that moment, fusing with Han Zong through the illusionary martial soul mountain. As a result, not only did Han Zong fuse with the power of the martial soul mountain, but even the six other people of the martial soul lineage had completely fused their powers with Han Zong through special methods. Immediately, Han Zhang's presence became extremely terrifying. It made all the peak experts nearby frown as they became fearful. The legendary martial soul array of the martial soul lineage really does live up to its reputation. However, this isn't the martial soul mountain. The power you can borrow from the martial soul mountain is extremely limited. Just a projection of the martial soul mountain isn't enough for you to do whatever you want here, said the elder from the heaven-splitting ancestor. He directly struck out with his hand. His hand seemed to fuse with the world, fusing with the laws as it crushed down on Han Zong with the supreme mysteries of the world. However, at this moment, a stick appeared out of nowhere. It struck the old man's hand gently with one end. Immediately, a devastating presence erupted, directly ripping through space and forming a fist-sized black hole. It devoured everything in the surroundings and sucked in all the ripples of energy. The elder from the heaven-splitting clan remained the same as before after the strike, but the stick that had appeared out of nowhere dimmed. An old woman silently appeared, and the walking stick returned to her hand. "I was expecting people from the God clan to come a long time ago, but I never thought it would be you. It looks like the leader of your God clan, who still hasn't matured, really does place great importance on Jianshan. He's actually sent a hall elder personally." The elder from the heaven-splitting clan looked at the old woman calmly. "What? A hall elder of the God clan?" The expressions of all the peak experts gathered there changed when they learned about the old woman's identity and background. The God clan was known as the greatest clan in the Saints' world in the past. They were the indisputable, most powerful organization in the Saints' world. However, ever since the war god died, the God clan declined and lost their position as the greatest clan in the Saints' world. However, even with that being the case, the God clan was still one of the few peak organizations in the Saints' world. Their heritage was extremely deep, where very few people dared to provoke them. Tu San, since you know that Jianshan is someone our war god places great importance on, you should understand that you can't take away Jianshan, said the hall elder Tyne. She knew what kind of person the heaven-splitting ancestor was, and she also understood that the heaven-splitting ancestor definitely had an ulterior motive for taking away Jianxin. As a result, she could not allow Jianxin to be taken away by the heaven-splitting clan. Tu San shook his head, and a sliver of contempt flashed through his eyes. He said, "The current God Clan is no longer the God Clan of the past. Before your little war god truly matures, you don't have the right to say something like that to our heaven-splitting clan. Moreover, unless the great elder of your God Clan personally comes, none of you hall elders are my opponent." Tyne's eyes turned cold when she heard that. She said slowly, "I never thought that a small clan that was completely insignificant in the past would be bold enough to ride on the head of our God Clan. Tu San, since you're so confident, let me see if you can defeat an early Grand Prime with your strength as a mid-Grand Prime." With that, Tyne extended her staff towards Tu San, and a dense, green light immediately enveloped him. In the next moment, both Tina and Tu San disappeared from sight. "Hunzong, take Jianxun to the Martial Soul Mountain immediately. You can't let the people of the Heaven-Splitting Clan take him away. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor isn't a good person." Chapter 24-23. When Hunzong heard Tyne's secret message, his heart immediately sank. He became even more determined to prevent the Heaven-Splitting Clan from taking away Jianxin. Hunzong has already used the Martial Soul Array. He's condensed the power of the Martial Soul Mountain and 6 other people. Coupled with the strangeness of Martial Soul Force, we won't be able to do anything to him alone. Quick, let's keep Hunzong busy. We can't let him ascend the Martial Soul Mountain before Jianshan hands over the Inata Tower. Since Jianshan refuses to hand over the Inata Tower, let's take it ourselves. Everyone, if you want the Inata Tower, we need to work together. Let's hit the Inata Tower first. We'll discuss how we'll split it in the future. At the same time, the peak experts gathered their spoke as well. They understood just how deep the heritage of the Martial Soul lineage was. Even though the Martial Soul lineage would never be able to become a Grand Prime, no peak organization in the Saints world dared to underestimate the Martial Soul lineage. This was all because of the existence of the Martial Soul Mountain. They knew extremely well that once Jianshan returned to the Martial Soul Mountain, there would be nothing they could do. This is the territory of my Daohuang Empire. I'll be responsible for collecting the Inata Tower. You just need to keep Hunzong busy. We'll discuss who gets the Inata Tower after we get it, said the retired emperor of the Daohuang Empire. Meanwhile, the supreme emperor of the Daohuang Empire spoke. His entire body was coiled by the aura of the imperial Dao, and he was reserved in speech and manner while emanating a dignified, imposing aura. He directly struck out. His hand shattered space, breaking through space and time, arriving before Jianshan in a single instance. "Jianshan, I won't harm you. I only want your Nata Tower. You better know what's good for you," said the retired emperor of the Daohuang Empire. The Martial Soul lineage and the God Clan stood behind Jianshan, so he clearly had some concerns about Jianshan's identity. However, these concerns clearly were not enough to stop him from taking the Inata Tower. "Don't you dare!" Hunzong bellowed out. The power of the Martial Soul Mountain fused with him, and he struck out decisively to stop the retired emperor of the Daohuang Empire. At the same time, his eyes instantly turned pitch black, like a black dome that could swallow all light in the world. Powerful Martial Soul force shot out again in the form of invisible swords, targeting the peak experts in the surroundings. "Be careful," some of the peak experts called out, but it was useless. Even when they sensed Hun Zhang's Martial Soul force attacks, they were unable to fend them off. The invisible sword condensed from Martial Soul force possessed a wondrous power that could shake up the souls of people. It pierced through all their defenses and struck their souls. Immediately, the bodies of all the top experts trembled. Confusion appeared in their eyes for a moment, and the movements of their hands also slowed down. Even the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire was no exception. However, Hunzong did not become entangled with these people. Taking Jianshan away was his priority right now. He grabbed Jianshan's shoulder and was about to leave. Boom! At this moment, A deafening rumble rang out from the horizon. A colossal azure pung appeared in outer space of the desolate plain. With a flap of its wings, it blotted out the sky and struck the projection of the Martial Soul Mountain heavily. The projection of the Martial Soul Mountain immediately shook violently. It constantly twisted and deformed as it rapidly dimmed. It was the Azure Pung King. He had taken action as well, stopping the people of the Martial Soul lineage from taking Jinshin away. Due to the Celestial Sword Saint's existence, he did not dare to set foot on the desolate plain. However, the projection of the Martial Soul Mountain was unable to descend on the desolate plain either. It could only appear in outer space. As a result, the Martial Soul Mountain became the best target for the Azure Pung King. Hun Zong seemed to be greatly affected when the Martial Soul Mountain was attacked. His body trembled violently as his face reddened. The power he received from the Martial Soul Mountain had almost been cut off. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance was a peak expert who had reached mid-Grand Prime. Moreover, he possessed the noble and powerful bloodline of a divine beast. Not only was his speed the greatest in the world, but even his battle prowess could be described as invincible among those at the same level. A single strike from him was nothing to scoff at. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, our martial soul lineage has always minded our own business. What are you trying to do? Hun Zong called out sternly. Jinshin must die. Even if the God clan protects him, I will never let him live. The Azure Pung King's cold voice boomed out from outer space. He was the only person who truly wanted to kill Jinshin out of all the peak experts. Hun Zhang's face was ugly. The Azure Pung King's original form was a great Pung. He was vicious and renowned for his vengeance in the Saints' world. He was not to be trifled with. Since he had said something like that, it meant that he really did want to kill Jinshin. However, he did indeed possess the strength and right to not fear the God Clan. The war god of the God Clan had not truly matured yet. With his terrifying speed, there was indeed no one in the God Clan who could stop him. Even the three great elders could not. Hun Zong, you won't be able to take Jinshin away without the Inata Tower. The peak experts who had been affected by Hun Zhang's martial soul force all recovered. They all struck out to keep Hun Zong busy. Booms constantly rang out in outer space. The Azure Pung King struck out again and again. Every strike was devastating, causing space to crack. The projection of the Martial Soul Mountain tottered under his attacks. It showed signs of collapsing, and the Martial Soul Array was forcefully severed as well. It could no longer support Hun Zong. After all, this was only a projection of the Martial Soul Mountain. It only possessed a portion of the Martial Soul Mountain's power. It was not the real Martial Soul Mountain. Without the support of the Martial Soul Array, Hun Zong immediately lost the upper hand against so many peak experts who were more powerful than him. The protective formation of the Daohuang Empire had already been activated. The power of the entire formation gathered outside the city, blocking the shock waves of the battle inside and preventing them from spreading out. The tremendous population of the city, which numbered in the hundreds of millions, had all been moved away by the formation. The situation is bad. Chu Jian, let's go assist Hun Zong. Out of the 7 of us, only the 2 of us can fend off those people aside from Hun Zong, Jinshin said. 6 figures stabilized the Martial Soul Mountain as hard as they could. A middle-aged man stared at the desolate plain and said sternly, "We can't. We have to stabilize the Martial Soul Mountain's projection. We can't let it collapse from the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance's attacks, or we won't be able to use the power of the Martial Soul Mountain to instantly cross this extremely distant space and return to the Martial Soul Mountain," said the person called Chu Jian sternly. On the desolate plain, the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire struck out once again. His hand trapped the surroundings and locked down space as he reached towards Jinshin. Jinshin's eyes turned cold. With a thought, the damaged Unita Tower shot out from between his eyebrows. The Unita Tower seemed to condense the power of ways to the limit, enough to suppress everything in the world. As soon as the tower appeared, the space that the ancestral emperor had locked down was dispelled in a single instance. Jian Shun, on the other hand, wielded the Inata Tower and used all of its power to smash it towards the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire. The Inata Tower. The ancestral emperor's eyes lit up. He stared at the Inata Tower Jianshun had taken out with shining eyes. His hand that originally reached towards Jianshun moved towards the Inata Tower instead. Terrifying power condensed on his hand. It seemed to be able to shatter space, creating the strongest defense. However, the Inata Tower was terrifyingly powerful, even though it was nowhere close to being able to unleash the power of a peak god artifact. Just the weight of the Inata Tower was extremely shocking. Due to his carelessness, the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire was blown several hundred meters away by the great force of the Inata Tower. It really is a peak god artifact after all. The ancestral emperor's eyes shone with a wondrous light. He had only been knocked back and was not injured. This was because with Jianshun's current strength, he was unable to injure a Grand Prime with the Inata Tower, even after refining 5 floors. Chapter 24:24. Jianshun's face was cold. He knew that he could use the Inata Tower to repel his opponent when he was caught off guard and had no idea about its power. However, he could not use the same method a second time. It was extremely likely for the Inata Tower to be taken away the second time. Jianshun put away the Inata Tower. Holding it in his hand, he flew backwards. Up ahead, the ancestral emperor's hand, condensed from terrifying energy, reached over with supreme pressure. Wherever it passed by, space froze and laws froze. It rapidly extended towards Jianshun, making it difficult for Jianshun to condense his laws of the sword. All the laws he grasped were affected, preventing him from using them normally. With a single strike, they could affect space and interfere with the operation of laws. This was the terrifying aspect of Grand Primes. Even though they were nowhere close to Grand Exalts who had fused with the laws, Grand Primes also possessed an extremely deep comprehension of the laws. They could use a portion of the power of laws. As a result, Jianshun felt like he was facing the world when the ancestral emperor struck out. It was as if the world he currently resided in had suppressed all the laws he grasped. However, Jianshun did not become flustered at all. With a thought, he activated the power of the Inata Tower. Immediately, the power of the Inata Tower broke through Jianshun's seal and enveloped Jianshun. Jianshun used the power of the Inata Tower to protect himself, isolating himself from the laws of the world. He retreated several hundred meters in a flash, arriving at the central square of the bustling city. At this moment, the central square had been reduced to a mess. Many structures had collapsed, reduced to ruins. They had basically been flattened by the shock waves of the battle. The protective formation of the Daowang Empire did not protect the city. Instead, it gathered around the city, sealing it up to prevent the shock waves from spreading out and causing even greater damage. This was because just too many peak experts had gathered here. Even the protective formation struggled to stop them all. If the formation was damaged, it would not be worth it. In the central square that had turned into ruins, there were still 2 places that were not affected at all. The first place was a teleportation formation that could cross continents. It was one of the most precious treasures of the Daowang Empire, and it wasn't easy to construct it. Thus, it received the best protection. In another place, there was a flight of stairs formed by sword chi. This was the path of swords established by the greatest expert on the desolate plain, the celestial sword saint. The path of swords was similarly unscathed. As soon as the shock waves approached the path of swords, they seemed to be sliced apart by an invisible sword, diverging in 2 directions. As for Jianshun, he was already standing beside the path of swords. He swept his gaze over the many peak experts gathered in the surroundings before raising his head to look at the sky. A wisp of determination appeared in his eyes as he brazenly stepped onto the path of swords. In an instant, Jianshun's entire body was enveloped by an intense sword aura. He was already standing on the first step of the path of swords. The expression of the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire changed. He immediately stopped attacking and stared at Jianshun from 100 meters away. He was emotionless. The Path of Swords had been established by the Celestial Sword Saint so that he could choose his successor. It was rumored that once someone made it to the end of the Path of Swords, they would have the opportunity to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. Once someone made it onto the Path of Swords, they would officially undergo the Celestial Sword Saint's test. The ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire no longer dared to continue attacking. Jianshan has actually made it onto the Path of Swords. Oh no, Jianshan primarily cultivates the laws of the sword, and his talent is rather impressive. If he passes the Celestial Sword Saint's test and becomes the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple, we won't stand a chance at all. The peak experts who kept Hunzong busy also paid attention to Jianshan's situation at all. They all cried out as their expressions became ugly. There were even people who directly questioned the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire. Don't worry, he won't be able to pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test. The Celestial Sword Saint has extremely high standards. How can a test personally set by him be passed so easily? Said a peak expert. At this moment, there was a flash. The Hall Elder of the God Clan, Tyne, and the old man from the Heaven-Splitting Clan, Tu San, returned as well. Both of them cut a sorry figure. No one knew what the final outcome of their battle would be. He actually wants to attempt the Path of Swords. The God-raised temple elder Tina looked at the blurry figure enshrouded in sword intent on the Path of Swords, and her brows furrowed slightly as she muttered to herself. However, this may be the best course of action for now. However, Tu San's face sank. He glared at Tyne and said coldly, "Your God clan has delayed my master's plans, making him wait a little longer. It's best if your God clan considers the consequences of offending my master." Tyne's eyes turned cold, and she replied coldly as well. "If your heaven-splitting clan has the ability, come to the God Nigma plane and settle your debts with our God clan." "Humph. My master is only a step away from that level of cultivation. Once my master breaks through, I'd like to see how your God clan can remain arrogant." Tu San snorted coldly, as if he was worried. At this moment, the battle between Hunzong and the peak experts stopped as Jianshan stepped onto the Path of Swords. He glanced at Jianshan on the Path of Swords before looking at outer space. His gaze became extremely shocking. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. Suddenly, Hunzong bellowed out furiously, and he suddenly vanished. When he reappeared, he was already standing on the Martial Soul Mountain. Martial Soul Array. Hunzong called out and condensed the formation with the 6 other people from the Martial Soul Mountain again. Their powers fused together, completely fusing with the power of the Martial Soul Mountain. Powerful martial soul force surged out like a tidal wave, attacking the Azure Pung King. The martial soul force came from the combined power of the 7 of them. The power was no longer scattered, condensing into a single point. It was extremely terrifying. A smear of fear appeared in the Azure Pung King's eyes as he constantly attacked the Martial Soul Mountain. With a flash, he retreated several 100 million kilometers away, escaping from the range of the Martial Soul Force. The 7 people on the Martial Soul Mountain were sunken. The Azure Pung King was just too fast. Even the attacks of Martial Soul Force could not catch up to him, so they were unable to do anything to him. Jianshan must die. No one can protect him. If your Martial Soul lineage dares to assist Jianshan again, I'll destroy your Martial Soul lineage as well. Unless your lineage hides on the Martial Soul Mountain forever, you won't be able to escape from my pursuit, the Azure Pung King said coldly. He was filled with killing intent. Chapter 24-25. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance actually dares to attack the Path of Swords. The Path of Swords was established by the Celestial Sword Saint. How bold of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. He really is the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. There really aren't a lot of people who dare to disrespect the Celestial Sword Saint in the Saint's world. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance just happens to be one of them. The peak experts gathered around the Path of Swords all cried out. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance dared to ignore the Celestial Sword Saint's intimidation and still attack Jianshan after he set foot on the Path of Swords, but none of them had the courage to do so. At this moment, the feather shot out by the heavenly king of azure brilliance arrived above the path of swords with surging energy and destructive might. The power of the attack was extremely shocking. If the feather really struck Jianshun, not only would he be doomed on the path of swords, but even the path of swords would probably be destroyed. Jianshun's face changed as he stood on the path of swords. He powered the Inata tower as hard as he could, wanting to hide in there as quickly as possible. This was a fatal attack from the Azure Pung King. Once he came into contact with it, it would be very difficult for him to survive with his current strength. However, the Azure Feather was just too fast. It ignored space and crossed through time, arriving in a single instance. It was so fast that Jianshun did not even have the opportunity to enter the Inata tower. Jianshun's heart sank. At that moment, he felt the threat of death. "Azure Bird, how bold of you!" At this moment, an old voice rang out. It was boundless, and the terrifying sound waves were so powerful that even space trembled. Even the laws of the world seemed to be affected. With that, the space around the path of swords suddenly twisted. The laws of space seemed to have been broken. As soon as the Azure Pung King's feather entered the twisted space, it immediately slowed down. In the next moment, the path of swords completely condensed from sword chi suddenly shone with dazzling light. A resplendent strand of sword chi shot out from the path of swords, rushing into the sky. The sword chi was like a river of stars, dazzling and resplendent. It carried a radiance that caused the heavens and the earth to dim in comparison as it tore through the sky and left abruptly. As soon as the feather from the heavenly king of azure brilliance came in contact with the sword chi, the devastating feather was reduced to dust. It seemed extremely fragile. However, the sword chi did not slow down at all. It shot towards outer space like a hot knife through butter. The terrifying sword intent had already locked onto the heavenly king of azure brilliance. The heavenly king of azure brilliance's face changed slightly as deep fear filled his eyes. His colossal body immediately shrank to 10 meters, turning into a miniature azure pung. However, sword slashes had appeared on the azure pang's body. These slashes either cut through its flesh, causing it to bleed, or left behind white marks on its tough feathers. This was the result of the extremely terrifying sword intent after being locked onto by the sword chi. The celestial sword saint was just too powerful. Before the sword chi had even arrived, the sword intent had already affected space, turning the space where the azure pung king stood into a domain of sword chi. All the laws and all the energy within the domain of sword chi had been turned into sharp swords under the celestial sword saint's will. Celestial sword saint! The azure pung king bellowed out in hatred. He no longer remained there. With a flash of azure light, he vanished in a single instance, fleeing towards the depths of outer space with terrifying speed. However, when he left, the terrifying sword chi from the path of swords passed through the azure light from the heavenly king of azure brilliance. Blood immediately sprayed into the air. The heavenly king of azure brilliance has fled, but he's injured as well, the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire said sternly as he stared at outer space. One of the heavenly king of azure brilliance's wings was almost severed. The celestial sword saint really is powerful. His cultivation level is already high enough, but his battle prowess has exceeded his cultivation level. The Hall Elder of the God Clan, Tyne, looked at the path of swords in admiration. Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting Clan remained silent. Only now did he discover that the celestial sword saint was much more powerful than rumored. At the very least, he felt the threat of death from the sword chi that had shot towards the heavenly king of azure brilliance earlier. He understood that if the person facing the sword chi was not the heavenly king of azure brilliance, it would have been impossible for any other expert with the same cultivation level as the heavenly king of azure brilliance to escape. Only the heavenly king of azure brilliance managed to escape with his unparalleled speed. The peak experts from other regions around the path of swords all shrunk back. They could not help but distance themselves from the path of swords. It was filled with a heavy sense of danger. As peak experts, They could sense just how terrifying that strand of sword chi was. Before that shocking strand of sword chi, they trembled from the bottom of their hearts. Many of them even felt chills run down their spines. Jinshin had lost the ability to see the outside world after the sword chi had shot out from the path of swords. The senses of his soul and his senses had all been blocked by a powerful sword intent. At this moment, what entered his eyes was a vast expanse of whiteness. This world was completely empty, and besides the flight of stairs that connected to the horizon beneath his feet, there was nothing else. White was the only color in the world. This is the world of the way of the sword. Jinshin sensed with his heart, and his mind immediately shuddered. He immediately understood the mysteries of this place. This world was clearly condensed from the way of the sword. The stairs beneath his feet were condensed from the laws of the sword. Every step of the stairs that led to the sky represented a part of the laws of the sword. Jinshin sucked in a deep breath. He already understood that the test from the Celestial Sword Saint had officially begun. He began to climb the stairs slowly. He made his way up step by step with firm steps. Once he reached the end, he would have the opportunity to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. He did not want to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. If possible, he even wanted to stay away from the Celestial Sword Saint. After all, the Celestial Sword Saint was the greatest expert on the desolate plain. His strength was unfathomable. If he came into contact with someone like that for a long time, he was worried that the Celestial Sword Saint would notice something even with Mo Tianyin's mask. After all, he possessed the Azulite swords. However, he had no other choice right now. Jinshin did not stop along the way. The test of the way of the sword within the stairs gradually increased in difficulty. His current path was the simplest test. With his current level of cultivation, there was no need for him to stop at all. This was because Jinshin would pass through the various tests hidden in the stairs easily as soon as they appeared. Chapter 24-26. At this moment, the test from the path of swords became harsher and harsher, such that even Jinshin needed to rest for a while. He closed his eyes and comprehended. In the ruined city outside the path of swords, the Hall Elder of the God Clan, two San from the Heaven-Splitting Clan, and many peak experts from various places all stood below emotionlessly as they stared at Jinshin on the path of swords. Jinshin was unable to see anything outside the path of swords. Even his senses and the senses of his soul were blocked within the path of swords. However, the peak experts outside the path of swords could clearly see him. In everyone's eyes, Jinshin seemed to be unstoppable after setting foot on the path of swords. He made it through a third of the distance like a hot knife through butter. This caused many of the peak experts gathered there to become nervous. More than 90% of them did not wish for Jinshin to actually pass the test. This was because once Jinshin completed the path of swords and became the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple, he would receive the Celestial Sword Saint's protection. At that time, they would not be able to do anything to Jinshin. It's a pity that no external force can interfere with the Celestial Sword Saint's test, or else. At that moment, many peak experts sighed inside. If the situation allowed for it, they would have used various methods to make Jinshin fall off the path of swords. However, with the fate of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance and the Celestial Sword Saint's might, they did not have the courage to do that. He's clearly slowed down. Don't worry. He won't be able to pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test. The Celestial Sword Saint's path of swords has already existed for several 100,000 years. Countless prodigies have attempted it during that time in hopes of becoming the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. But in the end, no one passed. Jinshin will definitely be one of the countless failures. Elder, do you think Jinshin can pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test? Beside Tina, Aladona looked at Jinshin on the path of swords and asked in a concerned voice. It's very difficult to say. Although Jinshin's talent can be described as unprecedented, the Celestial Sword Saint's test on the path of the sword isn't as simple as scaling the heavens. This is because the path of the sword doesn't just test talent and intelligence. It also tests a person's personality. If your personality doesn't satisfy the Celestial Sword Saint, it'll be impossible for you to become his disciple, no matter how great your talent is. She stared at Jianshan with her old eyes and said, as a result, apart from having extremely great talent in the laws of the sword, whether you can become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple depends on whether you suit the Celestial Sword Saint's tastes. The Celestial Sword Saint has always been a loner. He never takes anyone seriously, nor does he befriend the other experts of the Saint's world. He has a very strange temper, so it'll be difficult to suit his tastes. Tu San, who stood before Tina, also stared at Jianshan on the path of swords with narrowed eyes. He sneered inside. Jianshan, do you think you can change anything just because you made it onto the path of swords? The Celestial Sword Saint is very powerful, but no matter how powerful he is, he's nothing in my master's eyes. Tu San was very confident. After all, his master, the heaven-splitting ancestor, was one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalt. He stood at the same level as the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, and he was only a step away from the supreme level of Grand Exalts. A peak figure like that could indeed reign supreme in the Saint's world. At this moment, Jianshan was already high in the sky on the path of swords. He had already completed half of the path of swords. What is this sword? A great voice suddenly rang out in the hazy world that Jianshan resided in. It was as loud as a bell, causing Jianshan's mind to tremble violently. The sword is a will, an aura of the mind. Jianshan closed his eyes and explained his understanding of the way of the sword through his mental comprehension. What is the way of the sword? In the void, the resonant voice rang out once more. The way of the sword is the loss. The way of the sword is the world. The tests on the path of swords became harsher and harsher. Gradually, it approached the essence of the way of the sword, touching on the core of the 3,000 ways of the world. The resistance that Jianshan encountered became greater and greater as well. As a result, the amount of time he needed to take each step increased by several-fold. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed since Jianshan embarked on the path of swords. During that month, Jianshan had already completed 3/4 of the path of swords. Only a quarter of the distance remained before he reached the end. During that month, nothing much happened on the desolate plain. However, more and more peak experts gathered on the desolate plain. These people had all hurried over from various places in the Saint's world with various thoughts after hearing that Jianshan had been exposed. Naturally, there were people who wanted a share of the spoils among them. After all, no one knew where Jianshan was hiding on the desolate plain before. Searching for him was just too difficult, so there were naturally many peak experts who were unwilling to do something so arduous and unrewarding. As a result, they did not take part in the search. However, now that Jianshan's identity had been confirmed and he had been forced onto the path of swords, the people who did not want to waste time and effort on searching for him finally found an opportunity. None of them believed that Jianshan could actually pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test. This was because they had already gained an understanding of the contents of the test from the people who had attempted the path of swords. They were certain that it was impossible for Jianshan to pass the path of swords. The peak experts gathered around the path of swords had all left. Of course, they did not truly leave. Instead, they hid in the distance and paid close attention to what was happening. With their level of cultivation, nothing could escape their notice. They could cross great distances in a single instance and arrive there. Jianshan had not returned empty-handed from the month of tests on the path of swords. Instead, he had benefited greatly. As he constantly advanced and broke through obstacles, he used his comprehension and understanding of the way of the sword to compare it with the mysteries of the way of the sword hidden within the path of swords. He found many areas where he was lacking in the way of the sword, allowing his comprehension of the way of the sword to deepen. My current comprehension of the way of the sword is at the great perfection of sword spirit. The next level is sword immortal. The great perfection of sword spirit is equivalent to the late divine king's comprehension of laws, while sword immortal is equivalent to the primordial realm. Jianshan sat on the ground as he was enveloped by light. Countless strands of sword qi revolved around him. The sword qi was sharp and powerful, but every single strand seemed to possess some intelligence. This was the symbol of sword spirit. However, at this moment, the sword cheese that were full of spirituality around him carried a sense of elegance, as if they had broken free from their restraints and surpassed the heavens and the earth. At sword spirit, the sword chi is in the word spirit, possessing intelligence. As for sword immortal, it's in the word immortal, possessing immortal intent. As for immortal, it's breaking free from the restraints and surpassing the world. Xiaoyao is free, Jianshan murmured. At this moment, he seemed to possess a sliver of immortal intent. He had already understood the true essence of sword immortal intent. He had reached the threshold of sword immortal, but he had not completely crossed over. However, since he had seen it and found the path, truly crossing over was only a matter of time. Chapter 24-27. Jianshan slowly opened his eyes. He stood up from the ground, and after composing himself, he continued onwards, making his way to an even higher step. However, he now possessed a sense of elegance. He was filled with an immortal's presence. Every single movement he made seemed to possess the supreme mysteries of the ways of the world. This was a change in bearing from taking half a step into the sword saint realm. Jianshan was still unable to control it completely, so it was very difficult for him to conceal it and return to his original state. As a result, it would always leak out unconsciously. As a result, he seemed very different. Afterwards, Jianshan continued to climb the path of swords, making it further and further away. Now, he had already approached the very end of the path of swords. He was getting closer and closer to passing the test. However, at the same time, the resistance Jianshan faced became greater and greater. He took longer and longer as well. The final part of the path did not just test a person's talent for the way of the sword. It also tested their battle experience, their ability to fight back from life or death situations, and even their mental fortitude. Jianshan had experienced countless life or death battles along the way from the Tianyuan continent to the Saint's world. As a result, his battle experience was extremely plentiful. However, even with that being the case, it was still extremely difficult for him to pass the Celestial Sword Saint's test. Jianshan, I've finally seen you after so many years. When Jianshan climbed up another flight of stairs, the scenery before him suddenly changed. He had appeared in a beautiful world filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers. In front of him stood an indescribably beautiful woman. She was peerlessly beautiful, and just by standing there, she seemed to have gathered all the colors in the entire world, causing the heavens and earth to dim in comparison. She was Shangwan Mu'er. Mu'er. Jianshan was stunned. He stared at the woman before him blankly. The softest and most fragile part of his heart seemed to have been tugged at. Jianshan, you wandered the saint's world for the sake of obtaining great strength, causing us to be separated more than we are together. We even have to endure the pain of losing each other at all times. Jianshan, give up on your pursuit of strength. Give up on the way of the sword. Let's go into seclusion and live a peaceful life. How about that? Shangwan Mu, her shed tears as her eyes were filled with eagerness. She pleaded. Her pitiful appearance seemed to be able to melt hearts of stone. It was very difficult to turn her down. Jianshan's mind immediately shuddered, and his will wavered. At that moment, he almost could not help but agree to Shangwan Mu'er's request and give up on his pursuit of power. He wanted to live a life of seclusion with Shangwan Mu'er, standing aloof from worldly affairs. Living a peaceful life is easier said than done. Jianshan shook his head gently. This world has always been one where the strong prey on the weak. Strength is the only thing you can rely on to survive. If you don't have enough strength, living a peaceful life is just wishful thinking. I won't give up on the way of the sword. I won't give up on the pursuit of strength either, because that's what I rely on to survive, Jianshan said firmly. His will was firm. With that, the portrait before him shattered loudly. Shangwan Mu'er vanished, and the beautiful world vanished as well. He returned to the hazy path of swords. Jianshan sucked in a deep breath. With determination in his eyes, he took a bold step forward and climbed up another flight of stairs. Afterwards, Jianshan went through various illusions. Without any exception, the illusions all involved the people closest to him. They either all betrayed Jianshun, or they were all slain before Jianshun. They used various methods to torture Jianshun's will. These were the weakest aspects of Jianshun's heart. They were his weak spots. As a result, his mind suffered unimaginable torture when he was tested by these illusions. He almost collapsed. The illusions were just too realistic. It was very difficult for people who had sunk into them to distinguish reality from illusion. As a result, Jianshun was greatly affected as well, where he struggled to distinguish reality from illusion several times. Inner demons. These are all my inner demons. Jianshun closed his eyes as he felt powerless. Inner demons were the demonic thoughts in a person's heart, and demonic thoughts referred to a person's emotions and desires. They were the weakest manifestation of a person's mind. Jianshun was not a saint. He had his own emotions and desires, and they would lead to the birth of inner demons. The final test of the Path of Swords is truly cruel. It can actually trigger the inner demons in the depths of my heart. If my will wasn't firm enough, I probably would have collapsed long ago after everything I've gone through before. I would have gone mad. Jianshun thought as cold sweat appeared on his forehead. However, his gaze became determined soon afterwards. He thought, these are all tests that I have to endure on the path to the strong. Since I want to reach an even higher level of cultivation, I can't let my inner demons affect me. My friends and family are indeed my weak spots. At that moment, it's all because I'm not strong enough. I don't have the strength to protect them. However, if I become a grand exalt one day, a sovereign who stands at the apex of the world, who will still be bold enough to threaten me with my friends and family. Once there are no restraints in my heart, the inner demons will naturally disperse. Very soon, Jianshun's gaze became determined. He continued to climb. After climbing another step, the scene before him changed again. He appeared on a battlefield in outer space. This was a war between the saints' world and the immortals' world. Outer space was filled with people. Jianshun was with Tai Ta, Ming Dong, Shenghuamu Changyang Mingyue, and all the people he was familiar with. They were leading the experts of the Tianyuan family against the immortals' world. Now, he had become a peak expert of the saints' world. It's the people from the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Jianshun, let's destroy them together. Tai Ta's voice rang out from beside Jianshun. The sword sect of Violet Heavens. Jianshun became dazed as he became confused. He had obtained the twin swords, so logically speaking, he belonged to the sword sect of Violet Heavens. He belonged to the immortals' world, yet he was currently helping the saints' world deal with the people from the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Let's retreat. Jianshun waved his hand. He did not want to come into conflict with the people of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Jianshun, what are you doing? Tai Ta's furious roar rang out. Jianshun was the person who held the fort. With his retreat, the God Clan was immediately in danger, allowing the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens to charge into the army and slaughter them all. Kill the war god of the God Clan. Several experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens struck out together to kill Tai Ta. In the illusion, Tai Ta was nowhere near as powerful as imagined. As a result, he immediately became heavily injured from the encirclement of several experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens. He was in danger. Even Ming Dong, Shenghuamu Changyang Mingyue, and so on were in danger. At this crucial moment, Jianshun finally struck out and repelled all the experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Jianshun, kill the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Kill the people from the immortals' world. Once they die, the immortals' world will suffer heavy losses. They won't be our saints' world's opponent anymore. The voices of Ming Dong and the others rang out from nearby. Chapter 24-28. They're already heavily injured. They've basically lost all their battle prowess. It'll be very difficult for them to even flee. Disciples of the sword sect of Violet Heavens, listen up. Form a sword formation and kill the enemy with all your strength. Elders, use the forbidden attacks with me to suppress Jianshun. At this moment, an old man from the sword sect of Violet Heavens called out. Immediately, He and the other experts sacrificed their vitality in exchange for strength that exceeded their own. They used a supreme sword formation to kill their way towards Jianshan. A sliver of a painful struggle flashed through Jianshan's eyes as he watched the experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens charge towards him. He turned around and glanced at his heavily injured family and friends nearby. In the end, he still took action. He stopped the supreme sword formation, blocking all the experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens and the Immortals world all by himself. However, he failed to injure any of them. When the experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens saw how Jianshan could not be defeated, they all made up their minds. They became determined and used the ancient forbidden attacks, burning away their lives. They were determined to kill Jianshan, even if they had to give up their lives. They were determined to wipe out the experts from the Saints' world under Jianshan's protection. Jianshan, why are you holding back? They're people from the Immortals world. They're our enemies. Hurry up and kill them all. The people close to Jianshan urged loudly from beside him. Brother, kill them quickly and avenge your sister. She almost died to their hands. The silver-haired Chanyang Mingyue also spoke out. She had been injured by the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Her injuries were extremely heavy, where her life was basically hanging by a thread. Jianshan stood in outer space. His body trembled violently as he endured a painful torment inside. On one side was his close friends and family, while on the other side was the sword sect of Violet Heavens that was inextricably linked to him. Now that they were on opposing sides, what should he do when their weapons clashed on the battlefield? What should he choose? In particular, when he looked at the experts from the sword sect of Violet Heavens who were already prepared to give up their lives, he felt pained. Although I'm in the Saints' world, I still belong to the Immortals world in the end. I'm a disciple of the sword sect of Violet Heavens. Are the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens going to die because of me? Jianshan revealed a distressed expression as his state of mind fluctuated violently. When faced with such a situation, he actually didn't know what he should do. Go! In the end, Jianshan still could not bear to see the experts of the sword sect of Violet Heavens die because of him. Before their lives were completely depleted, he waved his hand and moved away with the people on his side. He chose to escape. Jianshan, why aren't you willing to kill the people of the Immortal Realm? Why don't you wipe out the people of the sword sect of Violet Heavens? Jianshan, we need an explanation. You always show mercy to your enemies. Are you a person of the Immortals world? Afterwards, Jianshan faced everyone's doubts. Many people doubted his identity, and many people who were close to him could not help but distance themselves from him. Jianshan fell silent as he sensed the suspicious and cautious gazes from his surroundings. Suddenly, Jianshan felt like he had been isolated. He had become a lonely person. At this moment, the scenery before him suddenly shattered. All the people around him vanished, and he appeared on an unfamiliar battlefield in outer space. He was still a peak expert on the battlefield, but he was currently working with a sovereign of the Immortals world against an expert from the Saints' world who was enveloped in golden light. 4 swords hovered above the sovereign of the Immortals world. He controlled the 4 swords and was invincible. The sovereign of the Immortals world was blurry. Jianshan was unable to see him clearly. However, Jianshan recognized the 4 swords under his control with a single glance. They were the sword of mortality, the sword of reincarnation, the sword of slaughter, and the sword of vanquishing from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The expert shrouded in golden light was the war god of the god clan, Taita. Currently, he was working with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, engaging in a battle to the death against Taita in the depths of outer space. Taita was extraordinarily powerful as well. He needed to work with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt to fend him off. In the end, Taita was defeated after paying quite a heavy price with him and the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Taita was heavily injured. The Nirvanic Immortal Exalt immediately shot out with his 4 swords. He formed a sword formation in an attempt to kill Taita in a single stroke. However, Jianshan's mind shuddered at this crucial moment. He immediately thought of the time when he had come into contact with Taita. Suddenly, he struck out. He did not target Taita but the 4 swords of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. He stopped the 4 swords that wanted to kill Tai Ta. "What are you doing?" The Nirvanic Immortal Exalt called out. "I can't let Tai Ta die here," said Jianshan. "He's from the Saints' world. He must die." The Nirvanic Immortal Exalt called out and continued to attack Tai Ta. However, Jianshan did not shrink back at all. He stopped the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt from killing Tai Ta. In the end, he began to fight the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. At this moment, the golden light in the sky silently arrived. The heavily injured Tai Ta swung his axe towards Jianshan as he fought the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Jianshan stared fixedly at the axe that swung towards him. Disbelief filled his eyes. In the end, the axe landed on him with devastating power. Immediately, a piercing pain appeared from the depths of his heart. The pain caused Jianshan's mind to shake violently. In the next moment, he felt the world spin. Tai Ta vanished, and so did the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Even a vast expanse of outer space collapsed loudly. His consciousness returned to his original body, and the world in his eyes returned to the hazy, white path of swords. There were no longer any steps condensed from sword chi before him. Unknowingly, he had reached the end of the path of swords. However, Jianshan was unable to cheer up at all. Instead, he sat down where he was and remained silent. His heart was heavy. He knew that everything he had experienced in the illusion was actually the worry that had been hidden in the deepest part of his heart. Now that he was experiencing the test of his state of mind, it was triggered by a mysterious force and caused his subconscious to enter an illusory world created by his own spirit. The worry hidden in the deepest part of his heart was played out in an almost real form. In simpler terms, everything that had happened in the illusion was a demonic thought that had once appeared in Jianshan's head. Perhaps these thoughts had only flashed through Jianshan's head in the past, but he had forgotten them very quickly. However, they were magnified endlessly in the illusion. In the end, they became almost realistic illusions that could even affect his mind. However, the appearance of the illusion did indeed affect Jianshan greatly. He was forced to reevaluate his identity and position. He really was worried that everything he had experienced in the illusion would happen to him in reality one day. In all these years, you're the 3rd person to successfully make it through the path of swords. At this moment, an old voice rang out from outer space. In the next moment, the landscape before Jianshan changed. When he turned around, he had already left the path of swords and appeared on a mountain peak that reached into the clouds. Up ahead was a figure. An old man in a white robe was sitting cross-legged with his back facing him. "Junior Jianshan greets Senior Sword Saint." Jianshan immediately clasped his fist and bowed. Chapter 24-29. Jianshan was stunned by the Celestial Sword Saint's reply. He was not surprised that he could not become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. What truly surprised him was that there were actually 2 other people who had made it through the path of swords before him. Jianshan understood just how difficult the tests of the path of swords were. In particular, he was greatly affected by the final test of mental fortitude. He did not even know whether he had made it through successfully or not. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how extraordinary the other 2 people were. Their talent was no less than Jianshan's. "Senior Sword Saint, may I ask just how much talent is required to catch Senior Sword Saint's attention?" Jianshan asked. "It's not a matter of talent. You and the other 2 people who made it through the path of swords all possess extremely great talent. Even with the entire Saints world in perspective, there are only a handful of people with unprecedented talent like you. As for why you're not suitable to become Old Man's disciple, it's because you failed the final test of mental fortitude. You're not suitable to become Old Man's successor," the Celestial Sword Saint said slowly. His voice was old but powerful. Jianshan's heart suddenly sank. He asked, "Senior Sword Saint, does Senior know about the illusion we went through at the end?" "It's not an illusion. It's a test of mental fortitude, or you can call it a test of inner demons. All people with firm wills will have a rock-solid heart when they make it through the test of mental fortitude. They won't be affected at all. As for you, Your emotions fluctuated too violently when you made it through the test of mental fortitude. So you're not the person I'm looking for, said the Celestial Sword Saint. I see. Jianshun was relieved. At the very least, he was certain that the Celestial Sword Saint did not know about everything he went through in the illusion. Instead, the Celestial Sword Saint used the fluctuations in his mind to determine whether he had passed or not. Since I'm not suitable to become Senior Sword Saint's disciple, I obviously won't force you. However, Senior Sword Saint, can you let me stay here for 3 years? I will leave after 3 years. Of course, this junior is not without repayment. As a reward, this junior will present this item to Senior Sword Sage. As he spoke, Jianshun had already taken out a jade box. With the old man's cultivation, there are very few supreme treasures in the entire universe that can catch the old man's eye. What can a puny divine king like you take out? Only a chaotic treasure like the Fortune Jade can tempt old man. The Celestial Sword Saint had no idea how to react. Although I don't know what kind of treasure Senior Sword Saint is talking about, the item in my hand is quite extraordinary. Jianshun opened the wooden box as he said that. Immediately, a heavenly resource appeared. The heavenly resources were of extremely low quality. Even regular divine king experts would not be interested in heavenly resources of such a level, let alone the Celestial Sword Saint. However, the Celestial Sword Saint cried out in surprise. In the next moment, the heavenly resource in Jianshun's hand vanished and appeared before the Celestial Sword Saint. It's actually Xianwang Qi. It looks like you found the Xianwang microcosm. The Celestial Sword Saint said calmly. He was emotionless, as if even the Xianwang microcosm was unable to affect him at all. The Xianwang microcosm is hidden in a hidden place in the lower world. Moreover, it's an unexplored, extremely high-level Xianwang microcosm. I'm willing to exchange the information there for it, Jianshun said. He had only explored the outskirts of the Xianwang microcosm when he was in the Sea Realm. In reality, there was another world within the Xianwang microcosm. If the Xianwang microcosm outside the world was a mortal world, then the world within the world was the immortal's world. In the past, Jianshun only moved about in the outskirts of the Xianwang microcosm due to his limited strength. He did not enter the world. If the treasures of heaven and earth outside the domain were considered ordinary items, then all the species within the domain were considered immortal items. They were truly high-grade treasures. A Xianwang microcosm is indeed extremely rare. If it was a Xianwang microcosm with a world, it would be enough to make many Grand Primes go crazy. Unfortunately, it's still completely useless to Old Man. The Celestial Sword Saint said calmly. The Celestial Sword Saint said calmly. His old eyes were emotionless as he handed the heavenly resource back to Jianshun. He was not tempted at all. Jianshun was stunned. Was the Celestial Sword Saint really an otherworldly expert? He was unaffected by anything else, where even a Xianwang microcosm with a world was unable to tempt him. Jianshun was troubled now. There were many peak experts waiting for him outside. Once he left the Celestial Sword Saint's territory, it would be impossible for him to escape their pursuit. The Celestial Sword Saint's territory was the only safe place he could think of right now. Although he knew about a cavern hidden deep beneath the desolate plain, he was currently being watched closely by so many peak experts. Once he really went there, would he not be inviting trouble to himself? However, for the sake of the Empyrean Demon Lord, the old man can let you stay here for 3 years, but that's only 3 years. You can leave after that. At this moment, the Celestial Sword Saint's voice rang out. The Empyrean Demon Lord? Jianshun became doubtful when he heard that. Even now, he still did not know that Mo Tianyun was the Empyrean Demon Lord. After all, when he helped Mo Tianyun get out of the formation and save his trapped original body, he suffered a backlash from the chaotic force and entered a life-or-death situation. He had lost all sense of the outside world, so he did not hear the Saint of Grand Harmony's furious bellows. The Empyrean Demon Lord is the person who gave you the mask. He's the great elder of the heavenly demon religion, the Celestial Sword Saint said. The Celestial Sword Saint's voice rang out, and with a wave of his hand, Jianshan immediately felt his surroundings change. He had been sent to a gloomy cave by an irresistible force. The great elder of the heavenly demon religion is actually Senior Mo Tianyun. However, Jianshan did not seem to sense anything at all. He stood in the gloomy cavern as his head was in a mess. He had heard far too many rumors about the legendary great elder of the heavenly demon religion, but he had never thought that the great elder of the heavenly demon religion would actually be the legendary figure of the Tian Yuan continent in the past, Mo Tianyun. Within the city of the Daowang Empire that had already been reduced to ruins, numerous experts that had vanished earlier had gathered once more around the path of swords that shot into the sky. All of them stared at the end of the path of swords with unsightly expressions. Jianshan has actually vanished from the path of swords. Has he passed the Celestial Sword Saint's test and been accepted as a disciple? Impossible. This is impossible. Let's go. Let's go to where the Celestial Sword Saint cultivates and understand the situation. Chapter 2430. The Sword God Mountains was where the Celestial Sword Saint cultivated. All the peak experts from various places gathered outside the Sword God Mountains. The Sword God Mountain was so big, but there was not a single protective formation. It gave people the feeling that anyone could enter. However, none of the top experts gathered here dared to step into the territory of the Sword God Peak without permission. All of them stayed outside the Sword God Peak. They stared at the depths of the Sword God Mountains as deep fear and dread appeared in their eyes. They even showed some signs of wanting to retreat. However, they only calmed down slightly when they saw the peak experts around them. They had not come to ask the Celestial Sword Saint for his disciple. They had only come to confirm whether Jianshan had really become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple or not. It shouldn't be that easy for Jianshan to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. The Hall Elder of the God Clan, Tyne, happened to be among the crowd as well. She said with her old voice. Beside Tyne was Aladona. Aladona stared at the Sword God Mountains without blinking at all. She remained silent. Making it onto the path of swords only gives him the chance to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. It doesn't mean he'll definitely become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. Jianshan is a member of the martial soul lineage. It's not very likely for the Celestial Sword Saint to take him as his disciple, the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire said firmly. Jianshan is someone my master specifically wants. It's best if the Celestial Sword Saint doesn't take him as his disciple, Tu San said coldly. Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting Clan said coldly. The Celestial Sword Saint was very powerful, but he had the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor behind him. With the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor support, Tu San was confident even when he faced the Celestial Sword Saint. Afterwards, Tu San clasped his fist towards the Sword God Mountains and said sternly, I am Tu San. I come from the Heaven-Splitting Clan. Senior, I wish to pay a visit to the Celestial Sword Saint. Tu San's voice boomed through the sky like thunder, echoing through the entire Sword God Mountains. The peak experts gathered there all held their breaths as they stared at the depths of the Sword God Mountains, waiting for the Celestial Sword Saint's reply. Old man already knows the purpose of your visit. The old man has already permitted Jianshan to stay on the Sword God Mountain for a full 3 years. After 3 years, he will leave the Sword God Mountain and have nothing to do with the old man from then on. The Celestial Sword Saint's voice rang out from the depths of the Sword God Mountains. He ignored Tu San and announced to all the experts gathered outside. Tu San's expression immediately became rather ugly when he saw how the Celestial Sword Saint ignored him. After all, he had already reported himself to the Heaven-Splitting Clan, so his visit this time was no longer a personal matter. Instead, it was under the name of the Heaven-Splitting Clan. If the Celestial Sword Saint ignored him, then so be it, but the Celestial Sword Saint even ignored the Heaven-Splitting Clan. This made Tu San feel rather humiliated. On the other hand, the other top powerhouses from all over heaved a sigh of relief, one after another, as they began to discuss in whispers. Looks like Jianshan probably hasn't become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. The Celestial Sword Saint allowing him to cultivate on the Sword God Mountains for 3 years is probably a reward for him for making it onto the path of swords. I knew it. Who do you think the celestial sword saint is? How can it be so easy for Jianshun to become his disciple? 3 years. If that's the case, I'll wait another 3 years. Elder, what should we do next? Should we discuss with Senior Celestial Sword Saint so that we can take Jianshun back to the Godnigma Plane through the teleportation formation on the Sword God Mountains in 3 years? Aladona asked Tyne secretly. Tyne shook her head. With the Celestial Sword Saint's temper, it's impossible for him to agree to that. We can only wait here for 3 years. Once Jianshun emerges from the Sword God Mountains 3 years later, we'll think of something. The problem is that there's an extra heaven-splitting clan. Who knows what the heaven-splitting ancestor's intentions are? But he's actually determined to obtain Jianshun. That'll be troublesome. Tyne frowned as some worry appeared on her face. She said, "Before our war god matures, we can't declare war on the heaven-splitting clan. Although the heaven-splitting ancestor can't do anything to our god clan on the Godnigma Plane, we can't just stay on the Godnigma Plane forever. We'll have to leave one day, and once we leave, we won't be the heaven-splitting clan's opponent. That's because our god clan still doesn't have an expert who can contend against the heaven-splitting ancestor. I wonder what's going on with the heavenly palace of Bishing. They should have received news about the Inata Tower long ago, but why hasn't anyone come to take it back? If someone from the heavenly palace of Bishing comes, all of Jianshun's problems will be resolved, including the threat from the heaven-splitting clan." Tyne sighed inside. She really had no idea what the heavenly palace of Bishing was planning. Aladona's heart sank. She had already realized that the matter would probably become troublesome in 3 years' time. At the same time, the 7 members of the Martial Soul lineage gathered on the illusionary Martial Soul Mountain in outer space with Han Zong at the lead. 3 years. We still have 3 years. Chu Jian, Yu Chao, return to the Martial Soul Mountain first and make preparations. I'll stay behind for now and find an opportunity to meet Jianshun. In 3 years, we'll use everything we have to bring Jianshun to the Martial Soul Mountain successfully. Once we're on the Martial Soul Mountain, no one will be able to threaten us unless the heaven-splitting ancestor personally takes action, Han Zong said to the 6 other members of the Martial Soul lineage sternly. Then you have to be careful of Yu Chun, just in case he's up to something, Chu Jian warned sternly on the Martial Soul Mountain. Don't worry. Although Yu Chen's cultivation surpasses mine, his cultivation isn't much greater than mine. If it really comes down to a battle of life and death, he'll definitely be the one to die. Han Zong was extremely confident. Outside the Sword God Mountains on the desolate plain, Tu San said with a rather sunken face, "Celestial Sword Saint, Jianshun is someone my master wants. My master has already grown very impatient while he's been hiding. Does the Celestial Sword Saint want my master to wait another 3 years?" Tu San directly mentioned the heaven-splitting ancestor. In his eyes, only the heaven-splitting ancestor could keep the Celestial Sword Saint in awe. After all, the heaven-splitting ancestor was a supreme expert on the same level as the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. He was only a step away from becoming a Grand Exalt. In Tu San's eyes, he was so powerful that the Celestial Sword Saint could not compare to him. I don't want to repeat what the old man said before. No matter who it is, don't even think about taking away a single thing from the old man in the next 3 years. The Celestial Sword Saint replied in an extremely domineering manner, as if he feared nothing. The expressions of the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains all changed when they heard that. They all stared at the depths of the Sword God Mountains in surprise. The Celestial Sword Saint did not even show any respect to the heaven-splitting ancestor. Although the Celestial Sword Saint was renowned for his domineering ways in the Saint's world, never going back on his word, this was still a little too much. As for Tu San, his face darkened from anger. He bellowed out, "Celestial Sword Saint, you better think about the consequences of what you've said." The only response he received was a streak of light. The light between heaven and earth suddenly turned dark. An incomparably resplendent sword light that emitted a brilliance that caused the world to dim shot out from the depths of the Sword God Mountain. The speed of the sword light was unbelievably fast. It broke through time and space and arrived in an instant, sweeping past Tu San's body. Chapter 2431. The sudden turn of events caused the peak experts standing around Tu San to be shocked. They instantly distanced themselves from Tu San as their hearts shook violently. They could not remain calm at all. At that moment, many people felt their minds become blank. They struggled to believe what they were seeing was real. The Celestial Sword Saint had actually beheaded Tu San in a single stroke. After all, behind Tu San was the heaven-splitting ancestor who was only second to Grand Exalts. Celestial Sword Saint, what? To another side, Tu San's head produced a frightened cry in the air. He knew that if the Celestial Sword Saint really wanted to kill him, his soul would have been wiped out already. It would have been impossible for his soul to remain. Soon after, his head quickly merged with his body and reconnected with his body. This is the consequence you spoke of. The Celestial Sword Saint replied in a domineering manner. He did not fear the world. Tu San could sense the naked mockery in the Celestial Sword Saint's words, which made him both surprised and furious. He pointed at the Sword God Mountains as his lips trembled, but he dared not say anything. At this moment, the endless sea of clouds above the Sword God Mountains suddenly churned violently. At the same time, an indescribably tremendous pressure permeated the surroundings, enveloping the entire desolate plain. An extremely terrifying will had crossed through space and descended on the desolate plain. The arrival of the will caused the entire desolate plain to tremble gently. Everything fell silent as all of them trembled. It's the heaven-splitting ancestor. The heaven-splitting ancestor's will has descended. The peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains were all stern. They all distanced themselves from the Sword God Mountains. Their gazes towards the sky were filled with fear. Master, Master, you've finally come. Tu San was overjoyed. The personal arrival of the heaven-splitting ancestor had swelled his confidence. He felt like he feared no one, and all his anger from the Celestial Sword Saint was gone in the blink of an eye. Master, I almost died to the Celestial Sword Saint's sword earlier. The Celestial Sword Saint didn't even show you any respect. Tu San continued to fan the flames as he begged his master to teach the Celestial Sword Saint a vicious lesson. Celestial Sword Saint, you've gone too far. A tremendous voice boomed out from the surroundings. The endless clouds churned and finally condensed into a figure that was over 10,000 feet tall. This figure condensed from clouds and mist had clear facial features. It was lifelike and appeared to be in its 30s. Even though his appearance was ordinary, there was a supreme majesty gathered on his body. He was indomitable, and it was as if the entire barren state was trembling under his feet. Moreover, after this person appeared, he seemed to have replaced the heavens and earth here, becoming the only god in this world. The great Tao of the heavens and earth revolved around him and was under his control. The Celestial Sword Saint sat on the ground like an old monk on the Sword God Mountains. His old body was like an unshakable mountain. He stared at the heaven-splitting ancestor that was condensed from the sea of clouds outside the Sword God Mountains calmly. He was as calm as a well, without any ripples at all. At the same time, Jianshan emerged from a gloomy cave in another part of the Sword God Mountains. He stood at the entrance and stared at the huge figure outside. He was extremely stern. Although he recognized who that person was, he had already guessed the identity of that person in his heart. Why does the heaven-splitting ancestor want to take me away? He felt very curious. After all, he had nothing to do with the heaven-splitting clan, so why would a great figure like the heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly pay attention to him? Although the divine king of the heaven-splitting clan had died in the Tsang Poseidon Palace, Jianshan refused to believe that the heaven-splitting ancestor would personally stand up for the divine king. After all, the heaven-splitting clan was not the solitary sword lineage. Gongzheng was the only successor of the solitary sword lineage aside from the solitary sword ancestor. His death would naturally alarm the solitary sword ancestor. On the other hand, the heaven-splitting clan was large and powerful. The heaven-splitting ancestor probably did not even know the name of the divine king who had died in the Tsang Poseidon Palace. Moreover, The divine king had been killed by Ming Dong and not by Jian Shun, so there was even less reason for the heaven-splitting ancestor to pay attention to him. Jian Shun thought about it, but he was unable to understand the reason. At this moment, the heaven-splitting ancestor struck out. His 10,000 feet tall body formed by clouds and mist directly pressed his palm towards the sword god mountain across the sky. With that, space collapsed and the ground shook. The 3,000 ways that formed the order became chaotic as a devastating power crushed towards the celestial sword saint on the sword god mountains. This power was simply too terrifying. It had long surpassed the limits of what the void could withstand. Even if a trace of it leaked out, it could cause the void to collapse. The expressions of all the peak experts gathered outside the sword god mountains changed in shock when they sensed the power of the palm strike. You want to deal with old man just by descending with your will? Heaven-splitting ancestor, you're underestimating old man far too much. The celestial sword saint remained as still as a mountain on the sword god mountains. He remained seated on the ground and did not stand up. However, a powerful sword intent condensed on him. Afterwards, he extended a finger, and immediately, a streak of light shone brightly. All the laws of the sword and the surroundings seemed to condense on his finger, shooting out as a resplendent strand of sword chi. The sword chi tore through the air, causing space to crack. A black river appeared, connecting the surroundings. When the sword chi collided with the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloudy fist, there was no expected boom. The sword chi directly entered the fist and shot towards the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloudy figure with astonishing might. However, the heaven-splitting ancestors was actually unable to deal with the celestial sword saint sword chi. Wherever the sword chi passed by, the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloudy figure rapidly collapsed. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloudy arm vanished, while the celestial sword saint's sword chi continued onwards, directly piercing the heaven-splitting ancestor's body. Immediately, the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloudy figure rumbled. It actually blurred, almost collapsing. The three-birth sword intent. It really is the three-birth sword intent. The heaven-splitting ancestor's voice boomed out with heavenly might. His eyes shone brightly as he stared at the celestial sword saint with interest. What? The three-birth sword intent. The heaven-splitting ancestor's voice immediately caused all the peak experts outside the sword god mountains to cry out. No wonder. No wonder the celestial sword saint doesn't even fear the heaven-splitting ancestor. So he obtained the three-birth sword god's legacy. The Hall elder of the god clan, Tyne, sighed in amazement. The three-birth sword god was the sovereign of the world from the last aeon. He was a grand exalt who specialized in the laws of the sword. Over 1,000,000 years ago, the place where the three lives sword god passed away was discovered. By the time the experts of the saint's world hurried over, the dwelling was already empty. His legacy had vanished without a trace. No one knew who had obtained it. It looks like the person who obtained the three-birth sword god's legacy is the celestial sword saint. A peak expert sighed in amazement as his emotions became mixed. The celestial sword saint has actually obtained a grand exalt's legacy, and it's a grand exalt who has comprehended the laws of the sword. No wonder he's so powerful. I wonder if he has grasped the laws of the grand exalt or not. The laws of the grand exalt are truly an invincible technique that can make opponents despair. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Old Man Sword God Mountains are not a place that just anyone can set foot on, the Celestial Sword God Mountains said coldly. The Celestial Sword Saint said coldly on the Sword God Mountains. A sword hovered above his head as it shone brightly, illuminating the surroundings. In the next moment, the sword seemed to fuse with the Celestial Sword Saint. With the Celestial Sword Saint's power and will, it shot off and vanished from the desolate plain. On the Nine Clouds plain, that was extremely far away from the desolate plain, the heaven-splitting ancestor sat leisurely in a pavilion in the heaven-splitting clan that was the undisputed ruler of the Nine Clouds plain. He raised his head slightly and glanced at the sky. Chapter 2432. It was fast, just far too fast. The sword seemed to have traveled from another dimension. As soon as it appeared, it shone with dazzling light that was enough to make the world pale in comparison. It turned into a streak of light and shot towards the ground below with unimaginable speed. Immediately, sword intent surged. It was terrifying, and the entire Nine Clouds plain seemed to be enveloped by the supreme sword intent. Many ancient existences who were in seclusion across the Nine Clouds plain were roused. They looked in the direction of the sword chi as shock filled their faces. What terrifying sword chi? It's the celestial sword saint from the desolate plain. It's the celestial sword saint. The celestial sword saint is actually bold enough to attack the heaven-splitting clan. He's just too crazy. The heaven-splitting ancestor is a peak expert only second to Grand Exalts. Is the celestial sword saint so powerful that he doesn't fear the heaven-splitting ancestor? A sword has crossed the distance of galaxies and directly attacked the Nine Clouds plain from the desolate plain. The celestial sword saint is even more powerful and terrifying than I imagine him to be. Many peak experts sighed in amazement from various places on the Nine Clouds plain. They hovered in the air as they stared at the heaven-splitting clan from afar. The protective formations of the heaven-splitting clan had already risen up, enveloping the entire clan. The heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly vanished from the pavilion as well. When he reappeared, he was outside the protective formations of the heaven-splitting clan, where the sword had to pass through. The heaven-splitting ancestor's bearing was otherworldly. Even though he did not give off any presence as he hovered in the air, he gave off the presence that could control everything in the world. It was as if he had already stood above the world and surpassed everything. He had become the laws of the world and could control the operation of the laws. Of course, this was merely a feeling. It was a concept that appeared naturally when one comprehended the laws of heaven and earth to an extremely profound level. He was still a small step away from the supreme realm of becoming a part of the heavenly Tao. The flow of time on the entire Nine Clouds plain seemed to become abnormally slow at that moment. After the heaven-splitting ancestor appeared in the sky, the flow of time on the Nine Clouds plain seemed to be affected as well. The laws of the world seemed to change, causing the celestial sword saint's sword to seem slow. Wherever the heaven-splitting ancestor went, the laws there would change with him. With a single thought, he could influence the order of the world. With a single thought, he could create new laws. With a single thought, he could turn an entire region into his territory. He was extremely powerful. This was the strength that was second only to Grand Exalts. However, the celestial sword saint was not weak either. His sword possessed the power and will of the celestial sword saint, making it seem like the celestial sword saint had personally arrived. The sword condensed the laws of the sword as it clashed with the heaven-splitting ancestor. Whoosh! The sword light was like a river of stars. It pierced through all obstacles and arrived above the heaven-splitting ancestor's head. No matter how the heaven-splitting ancestor controlled the heavenly Taos of the world to stop it, it was to no avail. A gleam of light flashed through the heaven-splitting ancestor's eyes. His expression remained unchanged as he slowly raised his hand. He seemed to raise his hand slowly, but it was actually extremely fast. This was a phenomenon caused by the interference of the laws of space and time. At that moment, the celestial sword saint's sword was grabbed by the heaven-splitting ancestor. Energy and laws condensed in the heaven-splitting ancestor's hand, wrapping around the celestial sword saint's sword with extreme power. Afterwards, the heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly pulled his hand back. Immediately, the light of laws appeared, and all the energy in the surroundings seemed to fuse into his hand. A terrifying power that could destroy the world condensed in a single instance, wanting to trap the celestial sword saint's sword. At that moment, the sword shone brightly as the celestial sword saint's figure seemed to appear. The sword intent of the three lives sword god suddenly erupted as it clashed intensely with the heaven-splitting ancestor. Boom! High up in the sky, a dull rumbling sound came. The two supreme powers collided, causing the rules to tremble. The sword chi on the sword shattered, and countless streaks of light shot out in all directions like a dense rain. They ripped through space and shot towards the ground below with devastating power. Crack! The heaven-splitting ancestors' first bellow seemed to represent the will of the world. With that, spatial cracks appeared out of nowhere one after another. They were densely packed, blotting out the sky. It was a shocking, terrifying, and magnificent sight. It was as if the entire sky was collapsing. Every single crack appeared where the sword chi had to pass through. They were like huge mouths that devoured everything. As for the scattered rain of swords, they disappeared after entering the cracks. In the end, all the sword chi was devoured. The rain of sword chi that was enough to cause a disaster on the Nine Clouds plain was nullified in such a simple manner. The celestial sword saint's sword flew out of the heaven-splitting ancestor's hand. It shone with dazzling light. It ripped through the space of the Nine Clouds plain and vanished. The sword did not launch a second attack after retreating from a single strike. The heaven-splitting ancestor remained calm. He stared at the sword that had left and did not continue to attack. If one paid close attention, they would discover that a faint, bloody mark had appeared on his hand. The heaven-splitting ancestor, who was only second to Grand Exalts, had actually been injured by the celestial sword saint's attack. Even though his injuries were not heavy, only superficial wounds, it was still shocking enough. Celestial Sword Saint, since you've obtained the 3 lives Sword God's legacy, I'll give you face and wait 3 years, the heaven-splitting ancestor said slowly as he stared at where the sword had vanished. He was calm and emotionless, as he said that, on the distant desolate plain, the 100,000 feet tall figure formed by the endless sea of clouds let out the same voice. Not only were all the peak experts on the Nine Clouds plain surprised by the heaven-splitting ancestor's concession, but even the peak experts who had gathered around the Sword God Mountains on the distant desolate plain, ready to see how the heaven-splitting ancestor would suppress the celestial sword saint, were extremely surprised and shocked. The celestial sword saint had almost caused the heaven-splitting ancestor's sea of clouds to collapse. Not only was this a provocation to the heaven-splitting ancestor, the strongest expert below Grand Exalt, but the heaven-splitting ancestor actually did not pursue the matter. Such an outcome surprised all of them. It looks like the celestial sword saint is powerful enough for the heaven-splitting ancestor to take him seriously. The celestial sword saint has obtained a Grand Exalt's legacy. Although he might not be able to reach Grand Exalt's level, he'll be able to reach the heaven-splitting ancestor's level at the very least. Clearly, the heaven-splitting ancestor doesn't want to offend the celestial sword saint over such a small matter. Indeed, it's really irrational to provoke such a powerhouse over such a small matter. Chapter 2433. Even the heaven-splitting ancestor had taken a step back, so the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains naturally did not dare to remain there any longer. They all dispersed. They did not leave the desolate plain. Instead, they waited quietly in various places, waiting for Jianshan to emerge from the Sword God Mountains in 3 years' time. Tusan of the Heaven-Splitting Clan left the desolate plain, returning to the Heaven-Splitting Clan on the Nine Clouds plain through a teleportation formation. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor sat in a pavilion within the Heaven-Splitting Clan on the Nine Clouds plain. His eyes were slightly closed as the endless presence of ways permeated his body, making him seem like he had fused with the world, affecting the operation of the laws there. Tusan, who had just returned from the desolate plain, stood before him politely. He reported everything that had happened on the desolate plain to the heaven-splitting ancestor. Everything he said was the truth. He did not embellish anything at all. He did not dare to say anything wrong before the heaven-splitting ancestor. At the heaven-splitting ancestor's level of cultivation, he could see through the mysteries of the world with a single thought. He could see through the past and the future with a single thought, peering into the cause and effect. If Tusan dared to lie or embellish anything at all, the heaven-splitting ancestor would know immediately. The heaven-splitting ancestor opened his eyes after listening to Tusan's report. His gaze was as vast as the universe, and he said indifferently, "You're not responsible for not bringing Jianshan back successfully this time. I originally thought that Jianshan was an insignificant figure, but I never thought that he would be so extraordinary. The puny divine king actually prevented me from peering into anything about him. That's rare, so I've become slightly interested in him. Master, I'll definitely bring Jianshan back in 3 years, Tu San said politely. All right. The heaven-splitting ancestor nodded slightly. After a moment of pause, he said, Originally, I didn't take the celestial sword saint seriously, but since he has obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy, it's completely different. Although it'll be very difficult for him to become a grand exalt in the future, he can still reach my level with the 3 lives sword god's legacy. There's no need to provoke a potential enemy just for 3 years. Master is wise. Tu San had long understood this principle. The heaven-splitting ancestor paused. He hesitated slightly before continuing. Most importantly, he has obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy, so his battle prowess has far surpassed his original level of cultivation. It's not difficult for me to defeat him, but I'm not confident in killing him. He possesses a grand exalt's secret technique, so it's very difficult for me to stop him if he insists on fleeing. What's more, he already has the ability to hurt me. What? Hearing this, Tu San's face was filled with shock as he exclaimed, Master, this is impossible, right? If he hasn't obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy, he naturally doesn't have the right to injure me. Don't underestimate the legacy of any grand exalt. The heaven-splitting ancestor stared at the distant space as his gaze deepened. On the palm of his right hand, there was a sword scar that almost ran through his entire palm. Although the wound had already healed, the scars of the injury had not completely disappeared. You can leave. In 3 years, go to the desolate plain again. You have to bring back this Jianshan. I want to personally see just what's so special about this person that even I can't peer into anything about him. Tu San bowed politely before backing off slowly. Soon after Tu San had left, an old voice rang out. Heaven-splitting ancestor, the little master wants me to ask you when Jianshan will be able to return. This was the voice of the artifact spirit of the Azure Poseidon Palace. Tell your little master not to worry. Jianshan is very safe right now. She'll be able to see Jianshan in 3 years, the heaven-splitting ancestor said indifferently. On the Sword God Mountains on the desolate plain, Jianshan looked at the celestial sword saint who sat on the ground with his back towards him with mixed feelings. He bowed deeply and said, Junior Jianshan, thanks Senior for your assistance. Jianshan understood what had happened earlier. For his sake, the celestial sword saint had actually stood up to the heaven-splitting ancestor, which shocked him greatly. Even though he knew that this was all because of the celestial sword saint's bone-deep pride, it was all because of him at the end of the day. There's no need for you to thank me. Since the old man has agreed to let you stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, you have to stay there for 3 years. Not a day less, not a day more. After 3 years, you can leave by yourself. Leave it to fate, the celestial sword saint said calmly, but he was filled with an unquestionable sense of dominance. It was as if his words were the decree of the world. No one could change his will and his decision. Be careful of the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting ancestor has already become interested in you. No matter what you hear in the future, don't go to the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting clan is hell to you, not a paradise, the celestial sword saint said in an unfathomable manner. It was as if there were very few things in the world that he did not know. Jianshan's heart sank slightly. He said, Junior understands. You can leave. You don't need to worry about anyone secretly targeting you on the old man's Sword God Mountains. You can cultivate in peace. If you have any problems with cultivation, you can come here at any time, the celestial sword saint said slowly. He closed his eyes and remained calm. A profound presence radiated from him, resonating with the world as if he had fused with the entire Sword God Mountains. It felt like he had become a part of the Sword God Mountains, where he had fused with every single blade of grass and tree there. Afterwards, Jianshan entered seclusion and peace on the Sword God Mountains. He increased his comprehension of the remaining laws of creation, fire, and corrosion out of the 7 laws he had obtained from the depths of the desolate plain. I have to increase my comprehension of these 3 laws to the level of the Divine King within 3 years. Jinshin made up his mind as he sat in a gloomy cave in the Sword God Mountains. However, he could not use the Fortune Jade right now, so his comprehension of the laws was naturally much slower. As a result, he was not completely confident that he could complete the comprehension of the 3 laws within 3 years. He had temporarily cast aside the Grand Exalt cultivation method, the method of the Exalted Saint from the Tower of Radiance. His priority was to comprehend the 3 remaining laws. This was because only by comprehending the 8 laws from the 8 experts deep underground to the level of the Divine King would he be able to use the last strand of vital energy they had left behind, allowing them to fuse their powers together and unleash an astonishing strike. Jinshin had no idea how powerful the 8 of them were when they were still alive, but there was one thing he was certain about at the very least, which was that the underground cavern would not be able to endure an attack from the 8 of them. By then, the cavern would definitely collapse, and the corpses of the ancient great apes would be exposed. The desolate plain would definitely fall into chaos. Chapter 2434. Jinshin began to cultivate, focusing on comprehending the laws of creation, the laws of fire, and the laws of corrosion. Out of the 3 laws, the first one he chose was the laws of fire. The laws of fire were a law with extremely great offensive power. Once he comprehended the laws of fire to the level of the Divine King, his battle prowess would increase slightly. As Jinshin comprehended the laws of fire, the meditating celestial sword saint suddenly opened his eyes. He glanced back in Jinshin's direction, but his face did not change at all. He said indifferently, he's already comprehended the concept of sword immortals. If he continues, it's extremely likely for him to truly reach Sword Immortal in 3 years. However, he's not comprehending the laws of the sword, and instead comprehending the laws of fire. It looks like he's really planning on doing that. The light in the celestial sword saint's eyes flickered. His gaze became extremely deep at that moment. He murmured, Bloodtear has secretly set up traps in that place. If he really does that, he'll draw over Bloodtear. However, his true calamity won't come from Bloodtear. Whatever, let him do what he wants. In the blink of an eye, Jinshin had already spent over a month cultivating in the Sword God Mountains. He roused from his cultivation and frowned slightly. He was in a bad mood. Without the Fortune Jade's assistance, his comprehension of laws became extremely slow. Even though it was so slow that it was unbelievable in the eyes of others, it was impossible for him to comprehend the laws of creation, fire, and corrosion to the level of the Divine King in 3 years. The Fortune Jade is just too precious, so I can't use it. Even if I use it in the Inata Tower, I can't use it. After all, the Celestial Sword Saint is just too powerful. He's far more powerful than many Grand Primes. I'm not confident that the Inata Tower can withstand the senses of the Celestial Sword Saint's soul. After all, the Inata Tower is still damaged right now. It no longer possesses the same defenses as when it was in perfect condition, Jinshin thought as he worried. Kea just happens to have comprehended the laws of creation and the laws of fire, so I'll focus on comprehending the laws of corrosion first. I hope Kea's laws of creation and the laws of fire will be useful when the time comes. Jinshin made up his mind very soon. Just when he wanted to continue cultivating, he suddenly sensed something, and he looked outside the cave. It was also at this moment that 2 figures basically walked in side by side. Jinshin's eyes narrowed when he saw the 2 of them. He was surprised. This was because they were the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall and Hunzong of the martial soul lineage. I've been waiting for you outside for a month. You've finally woken up, said the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. He stared at Jinshin with mixed emotions. He cut straight to the chase and directly stated his intentions. Jinshin, I hope you can return that item. As long as you return it to me, I'll let bygones be bygones. Jinshin knew that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had come for the method of the Exalted Saint. However, he had only obtained the method of the Exalted Saint after great difficulty, after expending a lot of effort. Moreover, it was something he needed. He had obtained it through his own abilities, so how could he return it? Let bygones be bygones? Yu-chun, you make it sound so nice. I'd like to ask you, are you bold enough to pursue the matter? With that, Han Zong sneered from beside the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Afterwards, he did not even glance at the ugly Yu-chun. Instead, he looked at Jianshun encouragingly and smiled. Jianshun, don't worry. This is the Sword God Mountain. The fact that the Celestial Sword Saint allowed us in to see you is already an unexpected surprise. If he dares to do anything here, he'll definitely suffer, so there's no need for you to be afraid of him. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall snorted coldly inside. His gaze towards Han Zong was cold. However, it was just as Han Zong had said. He did not dare to do anything on the Sword God Mountain. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to remain at peace with his mortal enemy, Han Zong, at such a close distance. Jianshun, I understand you a little. You're a loyal person. You probably don't know that because of you, your teacher, the Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian, by you who you've taken care of many times, and Donglin and Shui will all be dragged into this. What awaits them will be severe punishment. In particular, Donglin Yinshui knew you were a member of the martial soul lineage. Yet not only did she not report you, she even helped you escape, causing our Radiant Saint Hall to lose the most precious thing. Her sins are extremely great. Let alone stripping her of her position as chosen saint, even executing her would be a light punishment, said the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall coldly. Originally, he disdained using such a method, but the Grand Exalt cultivation method was just too important to the Radiant Saint Hall. In order to take back the Grand Exalt's cultivation method, he was willing to do anything. Leader, are you threatening me? Jinshin's face gradually sank as well. He said coldly, even if we ignore the fact that I obtained the cultivation method through my own abilities, your Radiant Saint Hall should thank me for the appearance of the cultivation method and not hate me. It was because of me that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance began to awaken. It was also because of me that the hidden miniature world opened up. It was also because of me that the Grand Exalt's legacy that was suppressed under the steel appeared. Moreover, I only obtained the cultivation method from the legacy. The rest is still in your Radiant Saint Hall. The Grand Exalt's descendant, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, has obtained it. If it weren't for me, your Tower of Radiance would still be the same as before. It would be filled with endless resentment. It would be impossible for it to become a place protected by the Divine King of Radiance like it is now. As a result, your Radiant Saint Hall should thank me, because it was me who resolved a great danger for your Radiant Saint Hall. Jinshin's words caused the leader's face to change constantly. A shocking light shone from his eyes as he stared at Jinshin. He said sternly, "Why has the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awakened because of you? Perhaps it's because I possess martial soul force." Jinshin answered vaguely. Naturally, he could not reveal that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was no longer the original artifact spirit. The martial soul lineage has an extremely deep connection with Radiant Saint Masters. I don't know the exact reason, but I do know that martial soul force is required to obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy. This is because the final barrier of the steel cannot be smashed through forcefully. Only martial soul force can break through the final barrier and allow the Grand Exalt's legacy to appear. Jinshin stared at the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall with shining eyes and continued, "Martial soul force is the key to obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy." Impossible. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall stressed every single word. He could not accept this at all. Leader, you should go and ask the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. I don't know the exact reason, but it should know a little, said Jinshin. The artifact spirit should have digested some of the memories now, so it should be able to answer some questions. I will be back. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall glanced at Jinshin deeply. With that, he turned around and left. Martial soul force was required to comprehend the steel and obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy. This was just too shocking. It had completely overturned the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's understanding. He needed to return and find the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to understand this in detail. Chapter 2435. After the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall left, only Jinshin and Han Zong remained in the gloomy cave. Jinshin's feelings became rather mixed as he stared at the ordinary-looking Han Zong, who seemed just like a mortal. He did not know Han Zong before this, nor did he have any ties with him. He had only connected him to Han Zong because of martial soul force. However, in order to help him escape danger, Han Zong actually went as far as to offend so many peak experts, attacking everyone without any hesitation. He did not consider the consequences at all. His actions touched Jianshan deeply. This was because Jianshan could clearly sense that Han Zhang's intentions were completely different from everyone else's. The other peak experts had all come for their own selfish desires. They wanted to take the Anata Tower from him. However, Han Zong had no interest in the Anata Tower at all. The only reason he had come to the desolate plain was to receive Jianshan. As a matter of fact, even the 6 other members of the martial soul lineage had all come to the desolate plain. They gathered in outer space to provide support for Han Zong. Jianshan's opinion of the martial soul lineage changed due to the righteousness of the martial soul lineage. At this moment, Han Zong coughed gently and said, "I've come to see you this time, mainly to discuss what will happen in 3 years' time. You can only stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. You'll be very safe during those 3 years, but after that, you'll be directly exposed to the wind and rain. It'll be extremely dangerous. As a result, we need to think carefully about how we can break through the various obstructions and leave this place in 3 years' time." Currently, the 6 of them have already returned to the Martial Soul Mountain. They're preparing for the descent of an even greater power of the Mountain Soul in 3 years' time. However, the power of the Mountain Soul cannot directly descend on the desolate plain. It can only descend in outer space. As a result, the greatest difficulty we face is charging out of the desolate plain and reaching the Mountain Soul under the obstructions of so many experts. As long as we stand on the Mountain Soul, we can use the connection between the Mountain Soul and a Martial Soul Mountain. We can use the power of the Mountain Soul to connect with the Martial Soul Mountain and cross through endless space, instantly returning to the Martial Soul Mountain. For me, are you really not afraid of offending so many peak experts? Jianshan looked at Han Zong with shining eyes. You're the 8th brother of our martial soul lineage. You're a part of our family, in order to bring you to the Martial Soul Mountain. So what if the entire world becomes our enemy? Han Zong said boldly. At that moment, he gave off a fearless presence. Can the Martial Soul Mountain stop the heaven-splitting ancestor? Jianshan asked. He had already learnt from the celestial sword saint that the heaven-splitting ancestor had become interested in him. This sort of interest was not a good thing, so he had to consider the existence of the heaven-splitting ancestor. Han Zong became stern when he heard the heaven-splitting ancestor. He said, "The Martial Soul Mountain will indeed struggle to fend off experts like the heaven-splitting ancestor. However, it would take quite some effort for the heaven-splitting ancestor to enter. After all, he's one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalts. As long as Grand Exalts don't appear, he's the sovereign of the world. There won't be many places in the entire Saints world that can stop an expert like him. However, with the heaven-splitting ancestor's status, he probably won't go to war for you and take action personally." Jianshan understood. After a moment of silence, he said, "I have a plan in 3 years. Don't come to the desolate plain." "You have a plan?" Han Zong was surprised. Jianshan was only a divine king, so how could he avoid so many peak experts? "If nothing goes wrong, something shocking will happen on the desolate plain in 3 years' time. At that time, I will find a way to leave the desolate plain, so there's no need for you to come," said Jianshan. "Are you confident?" "Yes." "All right then." Han Zong looked at Jianshan sternly. He passed a jade slip to Jianshan and said, "Since you have your own plan, I won't say anything more." This jade slip contains some knowledge and usage related to martial soul force. I learned from Aoyama that you haven't grasped this yet, so I hope it can be of some help to you. Han Zong passed the jade slip to Jianshan and continued. "However, there's only some basic knowledge in there. It doesn't go into too much detail. The true core legacy of our martial soul force is engraved on the Martial Soul Mountain. It cannot be taken out, nor can it be passed on to you through other methods. If you want to grasp it, you need to return to the Martial Soul Mountain. With that, Hunzong bid farewell to Jianshan and left the Sword God Mountains. In the following period of time, Aladona came to the Sword God Mountains once as well. She worried about Jianshan's current predicament. The will of the heaven-splitting ancestor had descended, revealing his determination to take away Jianshan. This made the elder of the God clan feel powerless. She became rather fearful. This was because the current God clan really could not do anything to the heaven-splitting ancestor. In response to Aladona's worry, Jianshan remained extremely optimistic. He told Aladona that there was no need to worry. Jianshan, you have to be careful of the heaven-splitting clan. The elders have guessed that the heaven-splitting ancestor has noticed you, which might not be good for you. Take care of yourself. Aladona looked at Jianshan worriedly and warned him seriously. Before long, she left the Sword God Mountains as well. In the following period of time, Jianshan spent his time on the Sword God Mountains extremely peacefully. This was the Celestial Sword Saint's territory. Without the Celestial Sword Saint's permission, even the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall and the ancestral emperor of the Daowang Empire did not dare to set foot here. As a result, Jianshan had nothing to worry about at all. He began to comprehend the laws of corrosion with all his might. At the same time, Kea sat on the ground with her eyes closed in the underground cavern enveloped by a concealing formation. She cultivated there. At this moment, she slowly opened her eyes. She murmured with a frown, "Why is it becoming more and more difficult to break through now? I can clearly sense that I can already control the laws of the world at a higher level, but I'm still unable to break through. It feels like there's a power stopping me somewhere." Kea sighed gently. Even though she was unwilling to accept this, there was nothing she could do. Her gaze gradually fell on the huge underground karst cave. As she sized up the karst cave, a look of confusion gradually appeared on her face. But why is there a familiar aura in this place? But I've never been here before. Kaya's confusion gradually thickened. In the end, she looked at the very depths of the cavern. After a moment of hesitation, she stood up and made her way to the very depths of the cavern, ignoring Jianshan's warning before he left. Before long, she arrived 100 kilometers away from the cavern. Standing there, she could clearly see a huge headless corpse floating in a pool of blood. Chapter 2436. The blood pool that was as vast as an ocean gave off an extremely terrifying blood energy that submerged the headless corpse. It seemed to be nourishing the headless corpse, filling it with boundless vitality. The corpse belonged to the strongest king of the ancient great apes, Gusta. Kea stared at Gusta's headless corpse from 100 kilometers away. She glanced at the endless sea of blood from time to time as her doubt grew heavier. She could clearly sense that the source of the sense of familiarity was right up ahead. However, she was rather hesitant, as if she was afraid to approach it. This was because she knew that the region within 100 kilometers of the pool of blood was a forbidden zone. Once she set foot in there, it would be very difficult for her to survive with her current strength. However, this hesitation only lasted for a short while before she suddenly began to move, stepping into the range of 100 kilometers fearlessly. At a closer glance, Kea's eyes had already lost their usual color and liveliness. Her eyes had suddenly become hollow, as if she had lost her soul. Everything she did was not what she wanted to do. Boom! At the same time, the pool of blood 100 kilometers away was no longer calm with Kea's intrusion. The entire pool of blood surged violently as terrifying vital energy swept towards Kea with destructive power. The vital energy surged in a terrifying manner. Let alone Kea, who is just a divine king. Even primordial realm experts would face the danger of dying before the vital energy. However, Kea's eyes were empty and lifeless, as if she could not sense the incoming danger at all. She continued to move, heading towards the surging vital energy. In a single instance, the terrifying vital energy arrived before Kea with destructive power. However, just when Kea was about to be devoured, an invisible power seemed to radiate from her. The appearance of the power caused the laws to change. It was as if the laws in the space around her had been forcefully changed by a pair of invisible hands, forming new laws. In the end, the terrifying vital energy that was enough to kill primordial realm experts immediately became docile when it approached Kea. All of its violent power vanished, and it no longer possessed any offensive power. Kea's eyes remained hollow. She advanced step by step, slowly but firmly. She drew closer and closer to the pool of blood. The space around her twisted, and the laws became chaotic. It was as if the laws had been disrupted and forcefully changed, making her the ruler of this place. She was invincible. Up ahead, the tremendous pool of blood that nourished Gusta surged even more violently. The waves soared into the sky, erupting with even more terrifying vital energy that swept towards Kea. However, it was still useless. No matter how terrifying the vital energy was, even if it possessed enough destructive might to injure peak experts, it was unable to stop Kea. It was unable to harm Kea at all. In the end, Kea arrived 3 kilometers away from the pool of blood. At this moment, a barrier rose up, blocking Kea's path and enveloping the entire pool of blood. The barrier was extremely powerful. It fused with the terrifying vital energy within the pool of blood, providing it with endless energy. Moreover, fragments of the laws of the world had fused with it, allowing the barrier to possess unbelievable defensive power in the end. Kea stopped before the barrier. Her hollow eyes suddenly changed at that moment, becoming as vast as the cosmos. They were extremely profound, as if endless mysteries of the ways were evolving. They contained the truths of the world and the ultimate mysteries of the ways. Unknowingly, her eyes were no longer hollow. They had recovered their light. They were a pair of icy cold eyes filled with endless coldness and emotionlessness. They were extremely unfamiliar. Her eyes were completely different from Kea's. However, when Kea's eyes appeared, Kea's bearing suddenly underwent an overwhelming change. At that moment, she seemed to possess supreme dignity. The barrier that blocked Kea's path, where it was enough to stop grand primes, suddenly distorted. It cracked open silently, as if an invisible force had ripped it open, forming a tunnel. Kea's eyes were cold. The greatest mysteries of the ways seemed to condense on her, giving her an invincible presence that could control the world. She directly stepped through the tunnel in the barrier, arriving within a kilometer of the pool of blood. At such a close distance, even Jianshen would not be able to approach it with the Inata Tower. However, Kea seemed extremely relaxed, as if nothing could stop her. The pool of blood churned violently, as it produced a deafening roar. It was like Gusta's corpse was roaring silently. Terrifying pressure surged towards Kea in layers. The pressure was so powerful that it had reached an extremely shocking level. It caused space to distort and time to become chaotic. Even a few peak grand primes struggled to endure it. However, Kea's face did not change. No matter how the vital energy surged, no matter how powerful the pressure became, it was unable to shake her. It was unable to approach her. In the end, she stood on the edge of the pool of blood and stared at it coldly and emotionlessly. She extended a finger towards the pool of blood gently. With that, the world seemed to split apart. The waves rumbled as the blood began to boil, parting to the sides. In the end, a tunnel that led to the bottom of the pool of blood appeared. This blood pool was several hundred feet deep. At the bottom of the blood pool, there was a drop of brightly colored blood quietly lying in the deepest part of the pool. The droplet of blood was very different from the tremendous sea of blood in the pool of blood. Not only was the droplet of blood of a higher level, but the energy it possessed was even more terrifying. Even if all the vital energy in the pool of blood was added together, it would be nowhere near as much as the droplet of blood. However, the pure energy within the droplet of blood seemed to be constantly absorbed by the sea of blood. In the end, the energy within the droplet of blood drained away, while the power of the sea of blood gradually strengthened. In the end, the sea of blood's constantly strengthening power nourished Gusta's headless body. Not only was Gusta's body brimming with life, but it was also constantly being tempered, becoming stronger and stronger. Clearly, The droplet of blood only existed to nourish Gusta's body. A cold light suddenly flashed through Kaya's emotionless eyes when she saw the droplet of blood. Silently, she waved her hand gently at the droplet of blood. Immediately, the droplet of blood at the bottom of the pool of blood seemed to be summoned. It flew out from the bottom of the pool of blood and shot into Kaya's eyes as a red streak of light. Kaya's eyes seemed to contain a whole new world, connecting to another world. As soon as the droplet of blood entered her eyes, it vanished completely. Afterwards, two tremendous whirlpools seemed to revolve in the depths of Kaya's eyes. She stared at the endless sea of blood. Chapter 24:37. At that moment, Kaya's eyes seemed to have become two devouring black holes, devouring all the vital energy and flowing it into another space. It was an extremely shocking sight. As the vital energy rapidly flowed away, the amount of blood in the pool rapidly decreased. The water level of the pool plummeted so quickly that it was astounding. After all, the pool of blood before them was extremely large. There was so much blood stored in it that it could be described as an ocean. It was impossible to measure. However, even the water level of the pool that was as vast as the ocean was plummeting at a visible rate. It was possible to imagine just how quickly the vital energy in the pool was being drained away. In just 4 seconds, a third of the pool of blood had been drained away at an unbelievable rate. All the blood had turned into extremely pure vital energy and vanished in Kaya's eyes. However, Kaya did not finish absorbing all the vital energy. She stopped after absorbing a third of it. Afterwards, she slowly turned around and left the pool of blood. She walked into the distance without any reluctance. As for Gusta's enormous body with dark golden fur at the center of the blood pool, she didn't even take a glance at it. It was as if the corpse was not worthy of her attention at all. Even though the corpse gave off an extremely tremendous pressure and possessed a terrifying amount of energy, it was still not enough to catch her attention. In the end, Kaya walked 100 kilometers away from the pool of blood and stood 100 kilometers away from it. The churning pool of blood gradually quieted down at this moment, returning to its original state very soon. However, the depleted blood in the pool had yet to recover. The headless corpse in the pool had sunk below the horizon as well. Suddenly, Kaya's body swayed and she fainted on the ground. She seemed to have fallen unconscious. However, this unconsciousness did not last for long before she regained consciousness. The ruthless coldness that appeared in her eyes had already disappeared, and her eyes once again regained their normal luster. Strange, why did I suddenly faint? Kaya sat on the ground in confusion. She had no idea what had just happened. The white-robed leader, Yu Chun, gathered with several dozen divine king of the Radiant Saint Hall within the Tower of Radiance. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yu Chun, was not in the sacred pavilion of the Tower of Radiance. Instead, he was in a miniature world where the Grand Exalt's legacy had been sealed up for countless years. Not long after Jianshan left, the minor world opened up again. It didn't close up again, allowing people to enter and exit as they pleased. Even though this was the case, there were not many people in this small world. There were only several tens of them. Many curious Radiant Saint Masters had gathered outside the World Gate. There was no lack of peak lords, the Divine King of Radiance, among them. All of their gazes were filled with longing for the small world. However, none of them dared to take a single step forward and truly enter the small world. It was all because of the words of the Peak Master of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji. Gong Sun Ji's words stripped all the Radiant Saint Masters of their right to enter the miniature world. However, all the Radiant Saint Masters gathered there were unable to do anything about it. This was because Gong Sun Ji's true identity had already been known. He was the descendant of the Grand Exalt, so he had become an existence that stood above everyone. He also formed an insurmountable pressure over all the Radiant Saint Masters. The several dozen Divine King of Radiance gathered in the miniature world all showed respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Gong Sun Ji was the only Divine King who no longer bowed to the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. He no longer showed any respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. At this moment, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yu Chun, stood before the towering steel in the miniature world with his eyes closed. He comprehended the diagram within the steel. Although the legacy at the bottom of the steel had already been obtained, the diagram within the steel did not disperse. It still existed. At this moment, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall finally opened his eyes. He stared at the steel before him with mixed feelings. He thought, it really doesn't work. Once I comprehend the diagram to the end, I'll encounter an invisible barrier. Even with my abilities, I can't do anything about it. Is Jianchen telling the truth? Does the final step of the diagram really require martial soul force? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall frowned. Only members of the Imperial clan can comprehend the diagram Master left behind in the past. You're not a member of the Imperial clan, so you don't have the right to comprehend Master's diagram. At this moment, an obscure voice rang out in the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's head. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's mind shuddered when he heard the voice. Naturally, he knew that the voice came from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. This was because only the artifact spirit, a godlike existence in the Tower of Radiance, could communicate with him secretly and prevent him from finding the source of the voice. The Imperial clan? What's the Imperial clan? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall replied and began to communicate with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. People of the Imperial clan possess a unique power. This power is known as martial soul force. As long as you possess martial soul force, you're a member of the Imperial clan among hallowed Saint Masters. What did you say? The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance's words were shocking. It exploded in Yu Chen's head like a thunderclap, leaving him dumbfounded. The people of the martial soul lineage are irreconcilable enemies of our Radiant Saint Hall. How can they be a member of the Imperial clan among hallowed Saint Masters? Yu Chen refused to accept this news. It was just too shocking. It had completely overturned his understanding. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance's voice was cold and emotionless. I don't know why you, who are only commoners, have become enemies with the Imperial clan, but in my master's age, you were only subjects of an empire. Empire? Was there an empire completely composed of Radiant Saint Masters in the past? Yu Chen immediately asked. The Radiant Saint Hall did not have any records of this at all. Even the most ancient books and records could not be traced back to such a long time ago. That's right. In that age, you were a powerful race in the universe. You possessed a great and prosperous empire completely composed of hallowed Saint Masters. Under Master's lead, you opened up territory after territory in the universe, establishing your own world and establishing the kingdom of eternity. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance said slowly, recounting some of the past events. The master of the Tower of Radiance actually possessed martial soul force. Yu Chen was stunned. He struggled to accept this. The news from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was an unprecedented shock to him. Since the master of the Tower of Radiance was a member of the Imperial clan and possessed martial soul force, why didn't his descendants possess martial soul force? Yu Chen asked again. Chapter 2438. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yu Chen, had not conversed with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance for very long. But in that short amount of time, the information he learned from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance had an unprecedented impact on his mind. Even though he was a powerful Grand Prime with a mind as tough as a rock, he was still greatly affected. The Imperial clan is nurtured by nature. Yu Chen felt bitter inside. The martial soul lineage was the mortal enemy of the Radiant Saint Hall. They were like fire and water. Once they encountered each other, they would clash and kill one another. There was no room for compromise. As a matter of fact, some of the ancient records of the Radiant Saint Hall clearly recorded the various deeds of wiping out the martial soul lineage in the past. Both the Radiant Saint Hall and the martial soul lineage had existed for countless years. During that time, countless conflicts of various sizes had erupted between the two sides. As a matter of fact, the martial soul lineage had even been wiped out by the Radiant Saint Hall several times throughout history. All the members of the martial soul lineage had been wiped out, causing the martial soul mountain to become an empty region. However, the martial soul lineage was nurtured by nature. Even if all of them were wiped out, a new martial soul lineage would be born countless years later. All the secret techniques and legacies of the martial soul lineage were engraved on the martial soul mountain. As long as the martial soul lineage returned to the martial soul mountain, they could grasp them. It was exactly because of this that the martial soul lineage continued to exist until today. Now, the martial soul lineage that had been wiped out by the Radiant Saint Hall several times throughout history was actually referred to as the Imperial Clan by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, while they hallowed Saint Masters had instead become subjects of the Imperial Clan. This was a huge joke. If it were not for the fact that the person who said that was the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall probably would have slapped him to death long ago. Since the martial soul lineage is the Imperial Clan, why are they so weak? According to my knowledge, no one from the martial soul lineage has been able to break through to Grand Prime in history. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall asked sternly. Every member of the royal family is a powerful existence. They are the protectors of eternal kingdom. As for why they've become so weak, it's probably because something happened to the imperial family after my master died. The artifact spirit's voice rang out in Yu Chen's head. Yu Chen fell silent for a while before no longer caring about the martial soul lineage. He continued to ask, now that you've awakened, will you choose another master? If you want to choose a new master, will this person be a member of the royal family or a descendant of your master? Or should I say the rest? Although my master is dead, but the artifact spirit's voice suddenly came to a halt. Afterwards, it fell silent. Artifact spirit. Yu Chen waited for a moment. Seeing that the artifact spirit did not respond, he began to call out, but in the end, he did not receive any response. It was as if he had lost his connection with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. It was impossible for him to find the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Unless the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance contacted him, there was nothing he could do. After all, the Tower of Radiance was just too great of a level, and it was basically in perfect condition. It was completely different from the damaged Anata Tower. Even with the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's strength, he could not do whatever he wanted in the Tower of Radiance. At the same time, a white-robed, middle-aged man sat on the ground in an unknown space within the Tower of Radiance. The middle-aged man was the artifact spirit who had always been by Jinshin's side. Now, his identity had changed drastically. He had become the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. He had reached a whole new level. At this moment, the artifact spirit's body trembled gently. His body would be illusory and corporeal from time to time. He seemed to be extremely unstable. As the artifact spirit, he did not have a body at all. His current body seemed no different from a physical body, but in reality, it was only a spirit condensed from energy. Now that the artifact spirit's energy was unstable, his spirit was affected, making his body seem illusory. No, my master is not dead. My master is Jinshin. Jinshin is my true master, the artifact roared. The artifact spirit angrily roared out. The light in his eyes rapidly changed, as if two completely different thoughts were engaged in an intense battle. I've absorbed the remnant consciousness of the Tower of Radiance's artifact spirit. Although the remnant consciousness possesses the artifact spirit's memories, it also contains its thoughts. Its thoughts are influencing me, trying to turn me into it without me noticing. However, that's impossible. Remnant consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, don't even think about influencing my will. I will never become a second you, because when that time comes, I will no longer be myself. The artifact spirit growled out as he did everything he could to suppress the remnant consciousness influence on him. Yu Chen finally sighed and gave up on waiting after standing before the steel in the miniature world of the Tower of Radiance for quite some time without receiving a reply from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Leader, you must already know who I am. The master of the Tower of Radiance is my ancestor. My ancestor's legacy has chosen me, But the crucial cultivation method within the legacy has been taken away by Jinshin of the martial soul lineage through despicable methods. I hope the leader can take back the cultivation method as soon as possible so that my ancestors' legacy can be complete. As soon as Yuchen opened his eyes, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sunji, spoke up. His voice was filled with undisguised anger. He no longer showed any respect to the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Instead, he treated him as an equal. As a matter of fact, there was even a sliver of arrogance. It was as if Gong Sunji felt that as the descendant of the Master of the Tower of Radiance, he possessed the bloodline of a Grand Exalt. His status was even greater than the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Yuchen naturally sensed the change in Gong Sunji's attitude. He frowned slightly and said sternly, "This is something for the upper echelon of the Sacred Hall to consider. It's not something you should concern yourself with. Just do what you need to do." With that, Yuchen left. After Yuchen's departure, Gong Sunji's face gradually sank. He looked in the direction that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had left in and thought, "In the past, you were the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. You were supreme, and I could only look up to you. But now, I'm a descendant of a Grand Exalt. The bloodline of a Grand Exalt flows through me, and I've obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy. My future accomplishments are limitless. You'll be beneath my feet sooner or later. The position of leader will be mine sooner or later." Gong Sunji's confidence swelled. "Gong Sunji, although you're a descendant of the Master of the Tower of Radiance, it's not very appropriate for you to speak to the leader like that." Donglin Xiushui frowned from behind Gong Sunji. Gong Sunji snorted coldly. "It's not up to you to tell me what to do. Donglin Xiushui, I'll let you go this time, seeing how you fended off Jinshin with me before. If you disrespect me again, I'll get the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to expel you." Gong Sunji turned around and stared at Donglin Xiushui coldly. He said coldly, "Although I'm not the master of the Tower of Radiance right now, the Tower of Radiance was left behind by my ancestor, and I've obtained my ancestor's legacy. I'll inherit the Tower of Radiance sooner or later and make the artifact spirit accept me as its master." Donglin Xiushui looked at the cold Gong Sunji and remained silent. She did not doubt Gong Sunji's words at all. In terms of who was most qualified and most likely to inherit the Tower of Radiance, it would be very difficult to find a second person aside from Gong Sunji. After all, the submission of the Grand Exalt's legacy had already explained everything. Donglin Xiushui, don't argue with him. Gong Sunji's personality has changed drastically after obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy. He's no longer the Gong Sunji of the past. The Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak's voice rang out in Donglin Xiushui's head. Donglin Xiushui sighed gently inside. She listened to the Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak's suggestion and stopped arguing with Gong Sunji. Chapter 2439. Seeing how Donglin Xiushui no longer dared to argue with him, Gong Sunji became even more arrogant. He felt like he was looking down on everyone present. Afterwards, Gong Sunji looked at the entrance of the miniature world. He looked at the Radiant Saint Masters gathered there who wanted to enter the miniature world but were afraid to enter. He said coldly, "I want to know everything about Jinshin and his current situation in the outside world. If any of you can provide me with the most accurate and complete information, I can allow you to enter the miniature world. If I'm satisfied, I can even give you special treatment in the future." Gong Sunji's words caused a disturbance among the Radiant Saint Masters gathered outside. The light in the eyes of many of them flickered, and some of them immediately left to investigate for Gong Sunji. Gong Sunji's current status was completely different from before. Many Radiant Saint Masters, including the Divine King of Radiance, wanted to establish ties with him. As a result, there were many people who were willing to work for Gong Sunji. At this moment, 9 sword-shaped mountains stood silently in an extremely well-hidden space within the Tower of Radiance. It was unknown how long these 9 mountains had existed, but they were filled with an ancient aura, filled with the aura of time. At the peak of each of the 9 mountains, there was a snow-white divine sword. A total of 9 swords shone with dazzling light. They were like miniature suns as they stood at the top of the mountains. The space around each divine sword was distorted. This was a scene caused by an extremely powerful force, and this force came from the 9 divine swords. A destructive power was sealed within the 9 swords. It was powerful and terrifying. The middle-aged man, condensed from the artifact spirit, appeared silently at the center of the 9 mountains. He glanced past the swords on the 9 mountains and murmured, "The master of the Tower of Radiance had 9 extraordinarily powerful retainers in the past. They fought with him through outer space and achieved great merit. After the master of the Tower of Radiance died, his 9 retainers did not live on by themselves. Instead, they used their innate secret techniques to condense their vital energies and condense their bodies and powers into 9 swords. They were sealed here by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, becoming protector swords. They fought for the next master of the Tower of Radiance. As long as you possess the 9 swords, it's equivalent to possessing the power of the 9 retainers. You'll immediately possess the power to fend off the 9 peak experts. I learned from the memories of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance that the 9 retainers formed the 9 protector swords with their own bodies after the master of the Tower of Radiance passed away. Afterwards, the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance placed them here. As a result, the method to control the 9 protector swords is in the hands of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. The artifact spirit stared at the 9 protector swords and frowned. Although I know about the existence of the 9 protector swords, I don't know how to use them. It looks like I need to fuse with even more memories of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to learn more about how to use the 9 protector swords in greater detail. However, if I do that, the influence of the remnant consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance will become greater and greater. It might even succeed in turning me into a second artifact spirit. I'm no longer myself. The artifact spirit hesitated. Clearly, it understood that fusing with the memories of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance would be very risky. But very soon, the artifact spirit shone with determination. It gritted its teeth and said, "Master has spent so much effort to get me to stay in the Tower of Radiance and become the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. But Master is in great danger outside now, and I can't do anything. Once the 9 protector swords have accepted a master, I might be able to help Master. For Master, I can't care so much right now." The artifact spirit's figure suddenly disappeared. "What did you say?" "The martial soul lineage is actually the imperial clan among us Radiant Saint Masters?" As one of the 8 vice leaders, Xianzhan stared at Yu Chun in disbelief within the sacred hall that stood above the clouds. Yu Chun nodded. He was rather absent-minded. He said, "That is indeed the news I received from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance." Xianzhan stared at Yu Chun closely. After confirming that Yu Chun was not joking, he sucked in a deep breath and said, "I really never thought that the martial soul lineage that has always been at odds with us would actually sigh. What do you plan on doing next? Do you want to announce this news, or keep it a secret?" Yu Chun shook his head and said sternly, "Only the 2 of us know about this right now. Don't tell anyone else for now. Let's not even talk about other people being unable to accept the fact that the martial soul lineage is the imperial clan. Even I am unable to accept their identity. After all, the grievances between our Radiant Saint Hall and the martial soul lineage have run deep over all these years. It's basically unresolvable. If we announce this, it'll probably lead to an uproar." Xianzhan sighed gently. "This news is just too shocking. It really is best if we don't let too many people know about it." After pausing for a moment, Xianzhan stared at Yu Chun and continued, "Then what about Jianchun's cultivation method? What do you plan on doing?" Yu Chun stood with his hands behind his back. He stared at the endless sea of clouds outside the sacred hall deeply. After Jianchun learned that he possesses the bloodline of a Grand Exalt, his personality began to change drastically. He cares about this matter even more than me. He's determined to obtain the method of the Exalted Saint. If Jianchun survives in 3 years, there will definitely be a battle between him and Gong Sunji. One of them is from a martial soul lineage, the imperial clan of Radiant Saint Masters. The other one possesses the bloodline of the Master of the Tower of Radiance. It's extremely likely that he'll inherit the Tower of Radiance and become the second master of the Tower of Radiance. Their battle should be extremely interesting. At the same time, in another part of the sacred hall, the white-robed Bayou knelt there as she trembled gently. Her head was buried deep into the ground as tears constantly rolled out from her eyes. They shattered to pieces on the ground with endless sorrow and sorrow. Opposite Bayou was a middle-aged woman who was also wearing a white robe. She was sitting cross-legged with an expressionless face. The middle-aged woman was an elder of the Radiant Saint Hall, Mu Shui. Master! Bayou knelt before Mu Shui and sorrowfully called out, Bayou, you can go. Return to your soaring clouds peak. From today onwards, you are no longer my disciple, Mu Shui said firmly. She looked at Bayou with a hint of sigh and continued, Don't blame me for being vicious and heartless. If you want to blame someone, blame your second senior brother on the soaring clouds peak. Your second senior brother, Chang Yang, is actually Jianshan of the martial soul lineage in disguise. You're so close to Jianshan, so even if you don't know your second senior brother's true identity, I still won't accept you as my disciple. From today onwards, we are no longer master and disciple. We are no longer connected. You can leave, Mu Shui said coldly. Bayou's heart trembled when she heard Mu Shui's emotionless voice. She didn't say anything and kowtowed to Mu Shui 9 times. She wiped her tears and got up from the ground, leaving the sacred hall in a daze. Master, Bayou didn't know anything before. She's innocent, so why are you so heartless? After Bayou's departure, Donglin Yinshua walked in from outside. She looked at Mu Shui, who sat there with her legs crossed furiously. Mu Shui's expression became extremely mixed as she looked at Donglin Yinshua. She was filled with undisguised disappointment. She sighed deeply and said, Yinshua, you've always been extremely clever, but why have you become so foolish this time? You know the martial soul lineage is our mortal enemy, yet you still helped Jianshan escape. You made a huge mistake. I know what I'm doing. Master, are you going to do the same as Junior Bayou and sever all ties with me? Donglin Yinshua said. She showed no regret at all. Mu Shui's attitude towards Donglin Yinshua was completely different from how she treated Bayou. She sighed gently. Yinshua, what you need to consider right now isn't something as simple as severing your relationship with me or not. Instead, you need to consider how to face the upcoming punishment. Do you understand that your situation is much more severe than Bayou's? Chapter 2440. When she saw how Donglin Yinshua did not even care about her position as chosen saint for Jianshan, Mu Shui deeply understood that her most prided disciple's feelings for Jianshan had reached an extremely deep level. This made her feel powerless. All she could do was sigh inside. Master, disciple will be taking her leave. Donglin Yinshua bowed slightly before turning around and leaving. The Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian, sat in a small wooden hut on the top of the mountain. He held a thumb-sized crystal in his hand. The crystal was called a memory crystal. It could leave behind some images and sounds. Han Xian's hand trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the memory crystal in his hand. Even his face had become abnormally pale. This crystal was sent to him by his family. Inside it was engraved a message from the leader of the Han family. It was a message that changed his identity and destiny. As he stared at the crystal in his hand, Han Xian's eyes were filled with unconcealable grief. His eyes were already bloodshot. He didn't dare to accept that the contents of the crystal were real. He really wanted to use his divine sense to probe the crystal again to see what was recorded inside and read the orders from the Han family patriarch. However, he no longer had the courage. The Han family has expelled me from the clan. They've removed my name from the records of the Han family. From today onwards, although my surname is Han, I no longer have anything to do with the Han family. Han Xian murmured. His voice was extremely hoarse. Just because Chang Yang is my disciple, just because Chang Yang is Jianshan from the martial soul lineage in disguise, my clan has expelled me. Han Xian stood up slowly. He made his way out of the hut and stood on the top of the soaring clouds peak. He gazed at the sea of clouds outside. His bleak figure seemed so lonely. At the foot of the soaring clouds peak, The white-robed Bayou seemed to have lost her soul as well. She made her way up the steep and long stone steps, one step at a time. Her eyes were red, empty, and lifeless. She looked as if she had lost her soul. She did not choose to use the holy light to soar into the sky. Instead, she climbed a long flight of stairs mechanically with her feet, like an ordinary person. The second senior brother she admired the most was actually a member of the martial soul lineage. Now, he had become the public enemy of everyone in the Radiant Saint Hall. Even her most respected master, Mu Shui, who had once bestowed her with glory and status, had expelled her. The series of events dealt a very heavy blow to Bayou. Her heart, which was not tough yet, even though she had cultivated for quite some time now, the environment in which she grew up made her young girl. Her heart was extremely fragile. After a very long time, Bayou finally arrived at the end of the stairs. At this moment, her white boots were covered in mud. At the end of the stone steps stood the Lord of Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian. He seemed to have been waiting for a long time already. He stood there silently and stared at Bayou, whose white robes were stained with mud. "Teacher, I've already been expelled," Bayou sobbed as she looked at Han Xian's haggard face. "I already know. Although you're not the disciple of an elder, you're still a disciple of my Soaring Clouds Peak," said Han Xian. At this moment, a few hallowed Saint Masters arrived outside the Soaring Clouds Peak. To no surprise, the person at the front possessed a six-colored soul core. A six-colored soul core was equivalent to an over-god among fighters. "I'm a disciple of the Blue Water Peak, Gohan. Is the disciple of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Zhuofeng, present?" The leading hallowed Saint Master with a six-colored soul core called out loudly. He ignored Han Xian's presence, and his voice rang out across the entire Soaring Clouds Peak. Zhuofeng flew over from the Soaring Clouds Peak in radiant light. "You're Zhuofeng? I've come under my teacher's orders. The Soaring Clouds Peak is no longer suitable for you. Are you willing to leave the Soaring Clouds Peak and become a disciple of our Blue Water Peak?" asked the hallowed Saint Master with a six-colored soul core. Zhuofeng beamed when he heard that. Due to Jianshun, the Soaring Clouds Peak had gained quite a reputation in the Radiant Saint Hall. Zhuofeng had wanted to break free from the restraints of the Soaring Clouds Peak long ago, so he was immediately tempted by the invitation of another Peak Lord. However, he soon became troubled again. He looked at the Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian. Han Xian stood with his arms by his side. He said emotionlessly, "Zhuofeng, if you want to go, then go." "Thank you, teacher." Zhuofeng clasped his fist and left the Soaring Clouds Peak without any reluctance at all. Before long, another group of female Radiant Saint Masters arrived. The leader was a woman who seemed to be in her 30s. She also possessed a six-colored soul core. She said gently, "Is the disciple of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Bayou, present? I've come under the orders of the Lord of the Myriad Flowers Peak to invite you to join our Myriad Flowers Peak." The Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian, sighed gently as he looked at the people from the Myriad Flowers Peak. He seemed to age even more at that moment. The current Soaring Clouds Peak had indeed lost its momentum. Even the two remaining disciples had been snatched away one after another. Han Xian waved his hand rather powerlessly and said, "Sai, go ahead. Go and seek out a new future. The current Soaring Clouds Peak is indeed no longer suitable for you." With that, Han Xian turned around and left. His figure was bleak and seemed rather lonely. "No, I won't leave the Soaring Clouds Peak. No matter what happens to the Soaring Clouds Peak, I will always be a disciple of the Soaring Clouds Peak." In the blink of an eye, a year had already passed since Jianshin set foot on the Sword God Mountains. During that time, he had always been comprehending the laws of corrosion. However, since he could not use the Fortune Jade, his comprehension of the laws of corrosion slowed down significantly. He only managed to comprehend the laws of corrosion after a year. It looks like I'll only be able to comprehend the laws of corrosion to the Divine King level in the remaining 2 years. I can only rely on Kea for the laws of creation and fire, Jin Shun thought. Even though he directly absorbed golden cores of laws to increase his cultivation, so he would not encounter any bottlenecks, The amount of time he had was just far too short. And the leader of the Radiant St. Hall hasn't come again after that first visit. I wonder if he'll really make things difficult for Yin Shui and the Soaring Clouds Peak. It's a pity that I don't have the power to help them right now, Jinshin sighed. Jinshin sighed inside. He sat in the dwelling and stared in the direction of the Radiant St. Hall for a while before making his way out. He found the Celestial Sword Saint. The current Celestial Sword Saint was no different from when Jinshin had first seen him. He still sat where he was with his back towards Jinshin, meditating like an old monk. He had not moved at all. The old man knows why you've come. You don't need to worry about the people you care about in the Radiant St. Hall. The Celestial Sword Saint seemed to know everything. Before Jinshin could say anything, he understood what Jinshin was thinking. Jinshin knew that with the Celestial Sword Saint's strength, he would know everything that happened on the desolate plain every day, even if he did not set foot outside. He bowed towards the Celestial Sword Saint and said, "Senior, may I ask how Donglin Yinshui is doing right now?" The girl you speak of was taken away by Donglin Su before she was put on trial. Donglin Su is the current ancestor of the Donglin clan, so you don't need to worry about her. Jinshin immediately let out a sigh of relief. Chapter 2441. Time passed silently. Now, it had already been over 2.5 years since Jinshin had arrived in the Sword God Mountains. On this day, a faint, gray mist suddenly appeared in Jinshin's dwelling. It expanded into the surroundings with Jinshin's dwelling as the center. The gray mist possessed extremely great corrosive power. Wherever it passed by, the ground would melt and the vegetation would wither away. Even the origin energy in the surroundings was assimilated by the gray mist, becoming a part of it. As a result, the gray mist became even more powerful. However, that was all. The vegetation that was melting under the gray mist corrosion suddenly began to glow with hazy light. Powerful sword intent permeated the surroundings, drowning out the gray mist in a single instance. Even the melting earth also shot out sword light, forcing the gray fog to retreat. The Sword God Mountains was the Celestial Sword Saint's territory after all. Under the influence of the Celestial Sword Saint's sword intent, every single blade of grass, every single grain of sand, and every single rock had become extraordinary. They possessed power that could not be underestimated. At this moment, the gray mist retracted and completely dispersed from the cave. Afterwards, Jinshin emerged from the cave. After 2.5 years, I've finally comprehended the laws of corrosion to the Divine King level. To activate the remaining power of the 8 experts, I need the laws of the sword: creation, destruction, fire, space, strength, curses, and corrosion. I've already grasped the laws of the sword: destruction, strength, space, curses, and corrosion. Coupled with Keia's laws of creation and fire, I just happened to have comprehended the laws of the Divine King level. Now that he had achieved his objective, Jinshin no longer had any intentions of remaining in the Sword God Mountains. He immediately found the Celestial Sword Saint and bid farewell to him. He planned on leaving unexpectedly. Old Man said that you can stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. Not a single day more or less. The Celestial Sword Saint said in a domineering voice. Jinshin had no choice but to continue staying in the Sword God Mountain and spend the remaining half a year. In the remaining half a year, Jinshin planned to use it to comprehend the laws of Sword Dao. Although he possessed the method of the Exalted Saint, allowing him to cultivate Radiant Saint Force to an even greater level, it would be impossible for him to be of any use in the battle half a year later, even if his cultivation had increased drastically. The method of using martial soul force that Hunzong had given him before he left was only the basics. The true core legacy was still on the martial soul mountain. Just the basics were not enough to provide him with any assistance when he faced the peak experts half a year later. Therefore, Jinshin could only use this half a year to comprehend the Sword Dao. His Sword Dao realm had already comprehended the concept of a sword immortal when he challenged the Path of Swords. It was equivalent to having half a foot in the realm of a sword immortal. Sword immortals corresponded to the primordial realm. Sword immortals focus on immortal intent. Sword Chi needs to possess the concept of immortality. Although I've already comprehended it, my sword Qi still hasn't completed its transformation. In the following period of time, Jianshun did not return to his dwelling. Instead, he found a mountain nearby and sat there, comprehending the concept of immortality so that his sword Qi could complete its transformation. Although this seemed like a simple process, it was not easy to actually achieve. 1 month, 2 months, time passed bit by bit. Jianshun sat there for 4 months. During that time, he seemed to have been petrified. He did not move at all. The only change was that sword Qi would surge out from his body from time to time, wreaking havoc in the surroundings. The sword Qi was either tough, soft, strong, or weak. They constantly changed, but Jianshun still failed to take that final step and become an immortal of the sword. 4 months later, Jianshun finally finished his meditation and asked the celestial sword saint for guidance. Although he was confident that the final step to sword immortal would not take him too long with his talent, he clearly did not have the confidence to complete it in the remaining 2 months. If you want to become a sword immortal, the first thing you need to understand is the word immortal. Every person has a different view of immortal. In the eyes of mortals, immortal is an existence that possesses great power and can fly through the air and burrow through the earth. In the eyes of some accomplished cultivators, immortal is only a division of cultivation. However, in the eyes of old man, immortal is the way of nature. The celestial sword saint's powerful voice rang out in Jianshun's head like a great bell. Immediately, Jianshun felt enlightened. In a daze, he seemed to understand something, as if he had grasped something. Every person has a different view and a different definition of immortal. But what is the immortal in my heart? Jianshun left where the celestial sword saint cultivated in a daze. He returned to the mountain peak where he had sat for 4 months as he pondered deeply. My understanding of immortal before was that it was graceful, free, and unrestrained, surpassing the world. Xiaoyao was free. But looking at it now, my understanding of immortal has only reached a portion. It's not complete yet. No wonder I was only able to take a single step even after comprehending the concept of sword immortal. As it turns out, my understanding of immortal is still lacking. Only by making up for this so-called deficiency can I reach perfection and become a sword immortal. Jianshun sat down once again. This time, he was like a mortal. He did not use any power at all. In just a month, he was covered in a thin layer of dust. Even his white robes had lost their original color, becoming black. During the final 3 days before Jianshun had to remain in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, the Sword God Mountains welcomed a stormy night. Rain poured down as lightning flashed in the sky like snakes. At this moment, a bolt of lightning flashed through the sky with bright light. The bolt of lightning was like a flash of inspiration in Jianshun's head. At that moment, Jianshun immediately understood. He understood the concept of immortal in his heart. He suddenly stood up from where he was sitting. He raised his head and looked at the stormy sky. He pointed with a finger and yelled out, "My immortal is the world. The world is the void of the universe and the endless rivers of stars. It contains everything and is boundless. My way can accept everything. It can devour the rivers of stars. It can transform all powers inferior to me into my own way. From today onwards, I am a sword immortal, an immortal of the sword." Jianshun's voice was like the beginning of the world. It contained a mysterious power as it resounded through the sky. Boom! A bolt of lightning struck down. The lightning condensed at the tip of Jianshun's finger. As it flickered, it did not extinguish. However, in the next moment, the lightning condensed at the tip of Jianshun's finger turned into a resplendent strand of sword Qi. At the same time, the stormy sky silently changed. At some unknown point in time, the rain that poured down from the sky was no longer pure rain. Instead, it had turned into strands of sharp sword Qi. The sword Qi was densely packed, covering the sky and the sun. It scattered down from the sky, producing an endless stream of piu-piu sounds on the Sword God Peak. Jianshun used his sword immortal will to change the power of nature in this place. P.S. The public account has always been maliciously complained by some treacherous villains causing the public account to be temporarily restricted. Therefore, in the next few days, Xiaoyao will not be able to update the public account with new information and character pictures. It was because of the actions of these villains that tens of thousands of brothers were unable to know the latest updates. It also caused difficulties for many brothers to be unable to find a connection through the public account. Xiaoyao felt quite angry about this. Then, let us, the tens of thousands of brothers, curse these villains together. However, Xiaoyao had already spent some time today to collect evidence of these villains' malicious complaints. Once the restriction on the public account was lifted, the public account would resume updating. Brothers, please forgive us. Chapter 2442. In the distance, the celestial sword saint who had not moved at all suddenly opened his eyes at this moment. He turned his head and looked at Jianshun, who was bathed in the rain of swords. His old eyes became extremely deep. He's actually comprehended a way on such a level, using the universe as his immortal to become a sword immortal and reach the primordial realm. This is clearly the level of the ultimate way of the sword. He grasps the ultimate way of the sword, so the power of the laws of the sword he possesses is slightly more powerful than other sword immortals. Moreover, he uses the universe and the endless rivers of stars as his foundation. In the future, he has the potential to grow endlessly. If he can successfully grow and reach the peak, he'll definitely stand at the apex of the universe. The celestial sword saint murmured to himself. He stared at Jianshun from afar, as if he wanted to see through Jianshun completely. Only quite a while later did he murmur, "He has just become a sword immortal, and he already possesses a rough grasp of the way. He can interfere with the world with his will and change nature. If this child can grow up successfully, he really does have the potential to become a sword god. It's just a pity that he cultivates the chaotic body. Even if he becomes a sword god in the future and stands at the apex of the universe, his cultivation will be nowhere near enough to keep up with his cultivation." Several hours later, the rain settled down and the surroundings cleared up. However, Jianshun did not leave the mountain. Instead, he sat where he was, silently consolidating his cultivation as well as comprehending the various mysteries of the sword immortal realm. It wasn't until 3 days later that he woke up. This day was also the day that he had spent 3 years on the Sword God Mountains. It was not a single day, more or less. Not only was the celestial sword saint domineering, but he also had a rather strange temper. When he told Jianshun to stay here for 3 years, he had to complete the 3 years. He could not miss a single day, nor could he miss a single day. Today was the day that Jianshun left. "Thank you for your guidance, Senior, allowing me to become a sword immortal prematurely." Jianshun stood behind the celestial sword saint again and bowed deeply towards him. 3 years are up. Go, leave the Sword God Mountains. From now on, you have nothing to do with old man, the celestial sword saint said without even looking back. He remained as still as a rock. Junior will take his leave. If there's a chance in the future, I will definitely repay Senior's kindness. Jianshun bowed, turned around, and left. You're about to face a crisis of life and death. No one can save you from this crisis. Whether you survive or not will depend on your luck. Take care. The celestial sword saint's voice rang out in Jianshun's head when Jianshun descended the mountain. Life and death calamity? Jianshun paused, and the light in his eyes flickered. He knew that the celestial sword saint would not speak without thinking. Since the celestial sword saint had said that, it meant that he would face a true crisis of life and death. Moreover, he also knew that the crisis the celestial sword saint was talking about was not the one right before him. Is it the crisis I'll face in the future, like the sword spirits mentioned? Jianshun thought, but he shook his head soon afterwards. He already knew that the peak experts would not be able to divine anything about him. Although the celestial sword saint was very powerful, it was still not enough. It looks like the celestial sword saint also possesses a peak god artifact on the level of the sword spirits or the artifact spirit of primeval. If that's the case, the artifact spirit has seen a corner of my future. The more Jianshun thought about it, the more it made sense. After all, He had learned from the heaven-splitting ancestor's cloud clone that the celestial sword saint had obtained the 3 lives sword god's legacy. It made sense for him to possess a peak god artifact. Jianshun gradually traveled into the distance. The celestial sword saint stared at Jianshun's figure from the sword god mountains. His ancient eyes were extremely deep. He said, he still doesn't understand that the true crisis is actually right beside him. However, even if he does understand, so what? He won't be able to change anything. I hope he can survive. The artifact spirit sat in a secret space within the Tower of Radiance of the Radiant Saint Hall. His eyes were clear at times and cloudy at other times. He seemed to be struggling from time to time. The artifact spirit engaged in an intense battle with the lingering consciousness of the Tower of Radiance. Clearly, its current situation was much more severe than before. This was because he had fused with far too many memories of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. The lingering consciousness of the Tower of Radiance was affecting him more and more. 3 years have passed, but I still haven't found the memories to unseal the Protector Swords. Master, I can't help you. Experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains. Not only were all the peak experts who had left 3 years ago gathered here, but even more peak experts had hurried over from various places in the Saint's world after Jinshin's true identity was exposed. As a result, there were much more peak experts gathered around the Sword God Mountains compared to 3 years ago. They were scattered around the Sword God Mountains as they stared at it in fear. None of them dared to set foot in the Sword God Mountains. Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting clan happened to be among them. However, his gaze towards the Sword God Mountains was filled with even more fear. There was even some dread. 3 years ago, he was someone who had truly walked on the brink of death. If the Celestial Sword Saint wanted to kill him, that strike would have wiped out his soul. It was also from that moment onwards that he deeply understood just how terrifyingly powerful the Celestial Sword Saint was. As a result, he stayed far away from the Sword God Mountains. Tina of the God Clan actually hasn't come. It looks like Master's appearance has made her shrink back. But that does make sense. Aside from being invincible on the Godnigma plane, how are the God Clan supposed to contend with our heaven-splitting clan outside? Tu San scanned the surroundings with the senses of his soul as he sneered inside. At the same time, the figure of the martial soul mountain descended once again in outer space. Under Han Zhang's lead, all the members of the martial soul lineage gathered in a formation. Han Zhang stood on the figure of the martial soul mountain as he stared at the huge piece of land that hovered in outer space with shining eyes. Although he had learnt from Jianshan that something would happen on the desolate plain, Han Zhang still gathered here with the martial soul lineage just in case. He planned for the worst. Even more experts have gathered this time. Even if we brought a soul sword, it probably won't be of much use, the man called Chu Jian said sternly on the martial soul mountain. He was stern. Let's observe from here first. We won't take action until the very end. This matter will probably be different from the past, said Han Zhang. Jianshan slowly appeared on the edge of the Sword God Mountains. He made his way out of the Sword God Mountains. He did not purposefully hide himself, as he knew that all his methods of concealment would be useless before the peak experts. The mask Mo Tianyun gave him could only conceal his true appearance and conceal his presence. It could not hide him from the senses of the soul. P.S. Xiaoyao needs to write a total of 5 chapters if you include the chapter from yesterday. This is the 3rd chapter, so there are 2 chapters left. Xiaoyao can only leave the 2 chapters for tonight. Originally, he planned on finishing them last week, but Xiaoyao's speed at writing was very slow. He took 3 or 4 times more time to write a chapter than other authors, so he had to leave the 2 chapters for the next day. Chapter 2443. Jianshan did not fly. Instead, he walked on the ground like a mortal. He made his way out of the Sword God Mountain step by step at a very ordinary speed. He did not move quickly, but his steps were firm. Every single step seemed to possess the bearing of ways, the truths of the world, and the mysteries of it all. He had successfully become a sword immortal. Even though his cultivation had not changed, he had become a true primordial realm expert. Even though he had only just reached the primordial realm, he was still a primordial realm expert in the end. A primordial realm expert stood at the apex of cultivation in the saint's world. Once a divine kingdom possessed a primordial realm expert, it would immediately become an ancient empire. My will can change everything in the world. I can make everything weaker than my will fall under my control. Jinshin's heart was as calm as a well. As he left the Sword God Mountains, he carefully comprehended the various wondrous changes brought about by becoming a sword immortal. If one paid close attention, they would discover that wherever Jinshan passed by, every flower, every blade of grass, every grain of sand, and even the origin energy in the surroundings would suddenly glow with a hazy light as Jinshin approached. Everything in the world would be affected by Jinshin's will as a sword immortal as long as they were within a certain distance from Jinshin, turning into strands of sword chi. The primordial realm really is wondrous. Although I comprehend the way of the sword, I feel like I can control everything, as if my will can replace an entire region and form an independent domain, Jinshin thought. In reality, he did not know that not all primordial realm experts possess this ability. He possessed this ability because the way of the sword he comprehended was the ultimate way of the sword. The ultimate way of the sword was the king of the way of the sword. Unknowingly, Jinshin had already arrived at the boundary of the Sword God Mountains. However, he did not leave the territory of the Sword God Mountains. Instead, he stopped at the boundary and looked around. He was calm and showed no fear at all. I know you've all come. Since you've come, why hide in the shadows? Why don't you show yourselves? Jinshin said in a clear voice. His voice was like thunder, reverberating between heaven and earth. As he spoke, figures flickered in the distance. Numerous top experts withdrew their auras and gathered from all directions. They quietly appeared in the distance. Jinshin, we don't have any ill intentions towards you. We just need the Inata Tower. I hope you can part with it. We will definitely repay you generously. A peak expert who had just arrived on the desolate plain said to Jinshin, No malice. You took a fancy to the most precious treasure on my body, so you forced me to hand it over to you. Well, I didn't hand it over, you took it by force. Is this what you mean by having no ill intentions? Jinshin said righteously. Cut the crap. Jinshin, we only want the Inata Tower. You won't be able to keep the Inata Tower, so you better hand it over. Don't force us to attack you. Another person said coldly. Although you're a member of the martial soul lineage and have the God clan protecting you, you need to understand that not everyone in the Saints world fears them. A few peak experts spoke up. They were determined to obtain the Inata Tower. Jinshin stared at the group of people before him silently. He said nothing more. Instead, he took out a teleportation formation disc from his space ring unhurriedly and tossed it on the ground. Although he had reached Sword Immortal and his strength had increased drastically, he knew his limits. He knew that he was not the opponent of any of them. Many peak experts secretly shook their heads when they saw Jinshin's actions. They sneered. They could tell with a single glance that the teleportation formation disc Jinshin had taken out could only be used on the desolate plain. Although it was very far away, it was not enough to leave the desolate plain. Although the desolate plain was very large, it would only take them a few seconds to traverse the entire desolate plain with their level of cultivation. As a result, they believed that Jinshin was dreaming if he wanted to use the teleportation formation to escape from them. At this moment, the teleportation formation activated. As a powerful force enveloped Jinshin, Jinshin suddenly vanished. The peak experts did not stop him because Jinshin was still in the territory of the Sword God Mountains. They did not dare to do anything, so they could only watch as Jinshin left. However, the senses of their souls had already flooded the surroundings, enveloping the entire desolate plain. They did not miss a single spot. Found him. He's left the Sword God Mountains. Let's see how he's going to protect the Inata Tower now. Very soon, a peak expert sneered. Afterwards, all the experts gathered their left. The War Dragon Empire was one of the few everlasting empires on the desolate plain. It stood on the same level as the Dao Huang Empire and the Radiant Saint Hall. They were all peak organizations on the desolate plain. Several million kilometers away from the imperial capital of the War Dragon Empire, there was a swamp that gave off a foul stench. In the middle of the swamp, there was an ordinary-looking stone slab that was submerged in the swamp. At this moment, the stone slab suddenly shone with bright white light. Jinshin's figure had appeared on the stone slab. He had already appeared on the stone slab. This was the escape route he had set up long ago. In reality, he had already thought of how he would leave the desolate plain after learning about the existence of the underground cavern. As a result, he had secretly prepared everything long ago. Now it was finally put to use. At this moment, Jinshin disappeared from the teleportation formation disk with a flash. When he reappeared, he had already arrived at the bottom of the swamp, where he had discovered the fortune jade. After that, he dashed to the side, and his figure abruptly disappeared. Even his aura had vanished without a trace at this moment. A few seconds later, the poisonous mist filled the air. Figures appeared one after another in the air above the swamp. At that moment, all the peak experts who had rushed over to the Inata Tower had arrived. They had all arrived there. He suddenly vanished here. I can't find him with the senses of my soul. There must be an extremely high-level concealment formation in the swamp, or Jinshin would have never vanished under our watch. I'll go down and search personally. Immediately, several people dove to the bottom of the swamp and began a thorough search. The other peak experts hovered in the air and paid close attention to the people who had entered the swamp. Someone has suddenly vanished. Over there. There really is a concealment formation there. What a great formation. It leaves no traces at all. There are no pulses of energy, as if it was created from the world. Even with the senses of my soul, I can't find any traces at all. Very soon, the concealment formation hidden at the bottom of the swamp was discovered. The eyes of all the peak experts gathered their lid up. With a flash, they entered the concealment formation. However, as soon as they entered the formation, their expressions all changed. There was a mysterious power that was suppressing the senses of their souls. God damn it, the senses of my soul can only extend to a range of 1.5 kilometers. What the hell is this place? What a great power. It can actually suppress the senses of our souls to such a level. There must be a shocking secret hidden here. There's actually such a mysterious place hidden on the desolate plain. I've stayed on the desolate plain for countless years, yet I have no idea. All of a sudden, many of the top experts in the area cried out in surprise. P.S. This is the 4th chapter. You still have 1 chapter left out of the 5 chapters you owe. Including today's update, you still have 2 chapters left. Chapter 2444. Behind the concealment formation was a winding tunnel that led to the depths of the earth. At this moment, many peak experts were squeezed into the narrow tunnel. Their eyes flickered with excitement, and curiosity towards the unknown as they slowly made their way down the winding tunnel. They did not move very quickly. They remained vigilant the entire time. Not only did they have to be wary of the people around them, but they also had to be wary of any dangers that might suddenly appear in this unknown place. This was because this place was just too mysterious. Not only did it possess a concealment formation that prevented them from seeing through the senses of their souls, but it was also permeated with a mysterious power that could suppress the senses of their souls. As a result, all of them realized just how extraordinary this mysterious place was. As a result, all of them were wary of this unknown place. Compared to their caution, Jinshin, who had already been here once and was extremely familiar with this place, did not have any concerns at all. He moved through the winding tunnel as quickly as he could, heading towards the depths of the earth where the corpses of the 8 experts were bound. At the same time, Kaya, who had remained in the cave the entire time, turned her head as if she sensed something. She looked in the direction of the entrance, and a sliver of joy appeared in her eyes. She murmured, "It's Jinshin's presence. Jinshin has returned. After so many years, he's finally returned." Sensing Jinshin's presence, Kaya immediately became slightly excited. However, she frowned very soon. That's strange. Jinshin seems to be in a hurry. However, as soon as she thought of that, Kaya's face suddenly changed. This was because she had sharply sensed several dozen powerful presences behind Jianshan. The owner of each presence possessed terrifying power that could shake up the world. Kea sensed that something was amiss and became anxious inside. She didn't realize that in this underground cave where her divine sense was almost suppressed to the point where she couldn't use it, and even her senses were almost lost, how could she sense those top powerhouses who were still quite far away from here? These people have come with ill intentions, and they're getting closer and closer to Jianshan. If they catch up to Jianshan, it'll definitely be detrimental to Jianshan. What should I do? What should I do? Kea's face was filled with anxiety as she paced back and forth uneasily. All of a sudden, she seemed to have thought of something. She immediately looked at the ancient beast corpse that was chained up not far away. Kea arrived before the corpse and extended her hand without any hesitation at all. She pressed it against the corpse, and the laws of fire surged out, pouring them all into the corpse. She did not know why she would do something like that, nor did she know what the consequences would be. Everything was because an instinct from the depths of her soul urged her to do so. The corpse before Kea was the one who had passed on the laws of fire to Jianshan out of the 8 experts. An extremely powerful vital energy was sealed within the corpse. There were layers of restrictions around the vital energy that could block out all external powers. The restrictions had been left behind by the ancient beast when it was still alive to protect the last strand of vital energy it had left behind. Unless it was the golden core of laws it had left behind, no power, even the laws of fire, could break through the restrictions and awaken the vital energy it had sealed within, destroying what the 8 of them had set up back then. However, when the laws of fire from Kea came in contact with the second layer of restrictions, the restrictions actually melted away silently. In the end, the laws of fire from Kea entered the terrifying vital energy without any obstructions. Immediately, the vital energy sealed within the ancient beast seemed to awaken from its slumber. It began to surge violently. An unbelievably great power suddenly erupted with a terrifying pressure, forming an invisible storm that wreaked havoc in the cavern. At this moment, the corpse of the ancient beast that had died countless years ago seemed to be brimming with life once again. It displayed its might from the past, shaking up the surroundings. Kea was forced back by the pressure. Only when he had retreated over 10 kilometers did he come to a halt. He stared at the corpse of the ancient beast and became stunned. He had no idea what to do. Within the winding passageway that led underground, the suppression of the senses of the soul has become more and more powerful. It's gone from the initial 3 kilometers to 2 kilometers. There's no trace of Jianshan within these 2 kilometers. Since Jianshan knows about this place, he must have been here before. If he dares to move so quickly, it means there's not too much danger here. I think we've been overly cautious. This place is mysterious, but we're peak figures who have become grand primes after all. There really aren't a lot of places in the world that can threaten us. We can't be careless. Even the senses of our souls have been suppressed so severely. The expert who cast down this place is far more powerful than us. Their terrifying existences like the heaven-splitting ancestor or the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, at the very least. It's best to be careful. However, they moved faster and faster. Very soon, they surpassed Jianshan's current speed. The distance between them and Jianshan rapidly closed. 5 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 3 kilometers, the distance between them grew closer and closer. As Jianshan's soul had fused with a sliver of true chaotic force, the suppression he faced was much easier compared to the peak experts. As a result, he could already sense the approach of the people behind him, which made his heart sink. If this continued, even if he reached the cavern first, he probably would not have enough time to awaken the vital energy within the 8 experts. However, at this moment, the entire passageway began to shake violently. Afterwards, a shockingly powerful pulse of energy permeated the surroundings with a tremendous pressure. It filled the entire space in a single instance, being transmitted into the passageway. The strength of this pressure and the frightening energy caused the expressions of all the top experts in the tunnel to change drastically. Their advancing footsteps also came to a sudden halt as fear was revealed in their eyes. Jinshin's heart shuddered. The golden core of the laws of fire in his soul trembled gently. He immediately guessed that Kaya had awakened the vital energy of one of the experts deep underground. What a terrifying presence! At the very least, the person who possesses this presence is an 8th heavenly layer Grand Prime. It's even possible that they've reached the 9th heavenly layer, the same level as the heaven-splitting ancestor and the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. The top experts all stopped in the winding passageway that led to the depths of the ground. Everyone's expression had become unprecedentedly solemn. The sudden and terrifying aura had caused many of them to tremble with fear. Experts like that were only second to Grand Exalts. They were even more powerful than the celestial sword saint that they knew. All of them feared someone like that. No. Very soon a cry rang out. Don't you feel that the presence and pressure from the energy seems to be a little strong on the outside, like it's powerless? Chapter 2445. The eyes of all the peak experts narrowed when they heard that. They immediately sensed it carefully. With their cultivation, they discovered the peculiarities very soon. It really was like what the person had said. The terrifying presence that radiated from the depths of the tunnel did indeed seem powerful on the outside, but weak on the inside. It seemed powerless. This discovery caused the fear in their hearts to lessen by quite a bit. After a brief moment of hesitation, they continued to advance towards the depths of the ground. However, their speed had become much slower, and they all had concerns in their hearts. By now, Jinshin had already arrived in the huge cavern. He saw Kaya waiting there with a single glance. Afterwards, he stared into the distance at the colossal ancient beast that had passed on the golden core of the laws of fire to him. He said to Kaya, "Kaya, continue using the laws of creation you have grasped to awaken the power of their bloodline. It's time for us to fulfill the last wishes they gave us through their remnant wills." Time was short, so there was no need for pleasantries. With that, Jinshin flew off, approaching the corpses of the 8 experts. Kaya also understood that danger was rapidly approaching. Without any hesitation, he immediately moved towards the expert who had passed on the golden core of the laws of creation to Jinshin. At the same time, Qing Yishuan sat on the fortune jade on the 9th floor of the Inata Tower. Sword chi surged from her as her presence became more and more powerful. In the past few years, her cultivation had skyrocketed with the help of the fortune jade after absorbing Sword Master Yun Qi's golden core of the laws of sword. She was already a late overgod now, and she was on the verge of breaking through to the Divine King realm. At this moment, Qing Yishuan's presence suddenly swelled. Thousands of streaks of light shot into the sky from her body. Her vital energies rose to a whole new level at that moment. At that moment, she had finally broken through to the Divine King realm. Qing Yishuan did not continue to cultivate after breaking through to the Divine King realm. After stabilizing her cultivation, she finally opened her eyes slowly. Her eyes shone extremely brightly. Powerful sword chi condensed in her eyes. It was extremely aggressive, such that people weaker than her would not be able to meet her gaze at all. The sword aura condensed in her eyes lasted for a while before it slowly dissipated, allowing her eyes to return to normal. The Divine King realm had once been the cultivation realm that Qing Yishuan had dreamed of, but now that she had broken through to the Divine King realm, she showed no joy at all. Instead, she was extremely calm. I received a fortuitous encounter from Swordmaster Yun Qi, but it came from Changyang. Who is Changyang? He actually didn't want such a great fortune and gave it to me instead. Qing Yishuan thought back to when she received Swordmaster Yun Qi's legacy. She was filled with doubt, but in next to no time, her attention was drawn by the millstone-sized fortune divine jade beneath her, and she was extremely surprised in her heart. Moreover, what treasure is this jade? When I sat on it, The originally extremely profound, complicated, and difficult to comprehend laws of the heavens and the earth actually became much clearer in an instant, and it allowed the speed of my comprehension of the laws to multiply. Whatever, I better continue cultivating. Although I've already become the divine king, it's nowhere near enough. The heavenly king of azure brilliance and the solitary sword ancestor who hunted down Jianshun are both grand primes. I wonder if Jianshun is still alive after so many years. But if Jianshun is dead, I'll definitely avenge Jianshun personally once I'm powerful enough. With that in mind, Qin Yishuan continued to sit on the fortune jade and comprehend the laws of the sword. In the underground cavern, powerful vital energies were awakened one after another. Terrifying vital energies surged and churned, bringing with them powerful energy ripples. The cavern's huge space constantly shook. The chains that bound the corpses of the 8 experts danced wildly. They shook violently and produced the sound of metal clanking. 6 strands of vital energy had been awakened within the 8 experts. The 6 tremendous vital energies seemed to transform into dragons that danced in the air. They resonated with each other from a distance, vaguely forming a formation that displayed earth-shattering might. However, the formation was incomplete, so the 6 strands of vital energy struggled to connect and fuse together. Jianshun continued towards the next corpse. Very soon, he arrived before Swordmaster Yunqi's corpse. Without any hesitation, he poured the power of the laws of the sword into Swordmaster Yunqi's body. The vital energy sealed within Swordmaster Yunqi's body was no different from the vital energy of other experts. There was a protective technique around the vital energy, protecting it. However, when Jianshun's laws of the sword approached the forbidden technique, something unexpected happened. The forbidden technique suddenly erupted with terrifying power, easily nullifying Jianshun's laws of the sword. At the same time, a strand of power directly shot towards Jianshun. Swordmaster Yunqi had left this power behind when he was still alive. Even after countless years, it was still extremely terrifying, possessing the power to kill. The sudden change caught Jianshun by surprise. However, before he could think of anything else, the 7 golden cores of laws in his soul pulsed. The forbidden technique that shot towards Jianshun seemed to sense something. Its killing intent vanished, and it gave up on attacking Jianshun. Jianshun pulled back his hand from Swordmaster Yunqi's corpse. The light in his eyes flickered as he became surprised and doubtful. I understand now. Not just anyone can awaken the vital energy within the 8 experts. Only the people who inherit their legacies can awaken this power. As for other people, even if they comprehend the same laws as them, they'll be mercilessly obliterated as soon as they come in contact with the power that protects the vital energy. Jianshun understood everything very soon. He immediately looked in Keia's direction and became doubtful. Why were Keia's laws of creation and laws of fire not affected? However, this was not the time to consider this right now. He took out the Inata Tower and pulled out Qin Yishuan, who had just broken through to Divine King Realm. Young Master Changyang, what are you doing? Qin Yishuan was very displeased when she was interrupted in the middle of cultivation. She stared at Jianshun with a frown. Jianshun still wore the mask that Emo Tanyun had given him, so Qin Yishuan failed to recognize him. Jianshun did not waste any more words. He immediately got Qin Yishuan to awaken the vital energy within Swordmaster Yunqi. Qin Yishuan dared not disobey Jianshun. She immediately did as she was told and awakened the vital energy within Swordmaster Yunqi very soon. Afterwards, she was sent into the Inata Tower by Jianshun. I'm still missing the last strand. Jianshun's eyes became extremely bright. There was even a sliver of madness in them. He really wanted to know just how terrifying an attack would be when the vital energy left behind by the 8 experts fused together. He also wanted to know just what would happen to the desolate plain after such an attack. Although this attack won't be able to destroy the desolate plain, it'll be enough to make the peak experts who have set their sights on Inata Tower suffer. Moreover, The experts of the ancient Great Ape Clan should be rushing over not long after. Although I'm the one who destroyed this place, the people who coveted the Inata Tower will be responsible as well. Jianshan stood on the corpse of the last ancient beast as his eyes burned with madness. So it's the experts of the past who have already died. Jianshan, you've actually brought us to a place like this. It looks like we really should thank you properly. At this moment, the peak experts all arrived. They appeared in Jianshan's vision as they looked at the corpses of the 8 experts. Their eyes were filled with excitement. Chapter 2446. Thank me? Really? Jianshan stood on the back of a beast as he smiled strangely. His face gradually turned cold as he said slowly, "It's a pity that I don't need it." With that, Jianshan channeled the last power of laws into the last beast before him without any hesitation at all. "Oh no, stop him!" A ruddy old man in the crowd seemed to see through the mysteries of the place at that moment, and his face immediately changed. However, it was already too late. As Jianshan channeled the last power of laws into the ancient beast, the vital energy sealed within the beast before him suddenly surged. A tremendous pressure permeated the surroundings, mixing with the vital energy of the other experts and filling the entire cavern. At the same time, an extremely well-hidden formation suddenly appeared in the air. As the formation revolved, it enveloped the corpses of the 8 experts scattered across the cavern. Under the assistance of the formation, the vital energy of the 8 experts fused together in a single moment. All of this had been set up before the 8 experts. Even though their powers were all different under their arrangements, the 8 completely different powers truly fused together perfectly. They fused into one, forming an even greater and even more terrifying power that could destroy the world. The formation of the power caused the ground to tremble. The entire cavern shook violently, and the space within the cavern distorted violently. If it were not for the powerful formations protecting the cavern, it probably would have collapsed long ago. This is a trap. He's purposefully luring us here. What a cunning kid. Everyone retreat. The peak experts who had chased after Jianshan all paled in fright as they retreated in a hurry. The power formed from the fusion of the vital energy of the 8 experts had reached an unbelievable level. It made all of them tremble from the bottom of their hearts. It was also at this moment that the terrifying energy formed from the fusion of the vital chi and blood of the 8 experts suddenly turned into a sharp sword. With invincible might, it shot toward Gusta's corpse. The strike was extremely terrifying. It had exceeded the strength of any of the 8 experts when they were still alive. Wherever the sword passed by, space collapsed, and the laws became chaotic. The laws all pulsed. The barrier around Gusta's corpse rose up once again, enveloping the entire pool of blood. The barrier's defensive power was very strong, but it was still very fragile before the sharp sword formed by the fusion of the vital energies of the 8 powerhouses. With a great rumble, the barrier shattered. Under the devastating shock waves of energy, the sword condensed from the vital energy of the 8 experts pierced through the various obstructions with unbelievable power, landing on Gusta's body. Boom! Immediately, a sound that was enough to shatter the souls of regular primordial realm experts rang out. Terrifying energy exploded loudly, and the pool of blood collapsed. Blood splattered everywhere as an indescribably powerful storm of energy swept over with devastating power. Those top experts who were unable to leave in time were the first to be struck. They were all sent flying by the energy shockwaves. The protective light on their bodies flickered intensely, but it only lasted for a couple of breaths before it shattered with a loud bang. The faces of many paled as blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Even those who were wearing divine artifact armors or using defensive divine artifacts to protect themselves had their divine artifacts dimmed down. Moreover, the fresh blood within the blood pool carried powerful energy ripples. They were like sharp, hidden weapons flying at high speeds as they ruthlessly struck their bodies, causing these top experts to involuntarily retreat as they struggled to hold on. Even though their cultivations were supreme, the combined attack of the 8 experts was even more terrifying. It was so powerful that just the shock waves of energy were enough to injure them. With a great boom, the underground cavern collapsed. The powerful energy even broke through the ceiling of the cavern, creating a transparent crater that connected the outside world to the surface. Endless shock waves of energy used this as an opening and leaked out from underground, wreaking havoc in the air above the desolate plain. The body of the strongest king of the ancient great apes, Gusta, had already been reduced to pieces. His broken limbs and the blood in the pool of blood had all been blown out of the ground by the shock waves of energy. They rushed into the sky and appeared on the desolate plain. Among them was a small pagoda that was only the size of a fist and seemed to be very broken. This pagoda was unbelievably tough. The terrifying energy storm that was enough to tear apart Gusta's body and make many peak experts unable to withstand, it could not harm the pagoda at all. It could only make the pagoda flutter around like a leaf in the wind. Just like that, the tower was mixed in with the storm of energy. It charged out from the collapsed cavern with the flow of energy. At that moment, the entire desolate plain shook violently. Extremely violent earthquakes occurred in the 5 regions that were extremely distant. Mountains collapsed, and the ground cracked as tsunamis surged into the sky. Many cities collapsed, alarming all the experts. At that moment, if one looked from outer space, they would discover that the desolate plain that hovered in the sea of stars was swaying gently. The astonishing strike from the fusion of vital energy from the 8 experts had actually shaken up an entire plain. What's happening? What terrifying pulses of energy? What's happening? At that moment, the entire desolate plain was thrown into chaos. Everyone panicked. All the experts on the desolate plain gazed over in shock from afar. The 7 members of the Martial Soul lineage all stood up on the illusionary Martial Soul Mountain. They stared at the desolate plain in shock. Their faces were filled with shock. They personally saw an extremely huge hole appear on the desolate plain. It was connected to the ground, growing larger and larger, as if it was endless. The heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze seemed to be tangible, directly piercing through space as he stared in the direction of the desolate plain. Moreover, the power of waves circulated around him, making him seem like he had completely fused with the world. He represented the heavens, ruling over a region. He was supreme. The corpse of a dark gold king of the ancient great apes, and it's not one of the 2 dark gold kings slain by the spirit sages. It looks like it's the one who died even earlier, Gusta, who was known as the strongest king. Gusta was at my level in the past. Coupled with his special bloodline of the ancient great apes, his battle prowess is even greater. His body and blood will be of great use to me. The heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly vanished. This time, he had personally set off with his original body, hurrying to the desolate plain. Chapter 2447. The heaven-splitting ancestor hurried through the vast outer space. He seemed like he was taking a stroll. He did not seem to move quickly, but with every step he took, the surrounding space would change. A river of stars with a single step, a world with a single step. Distance did not seem to exist under his feet in the boundless outer space. He moved through it at an unbelievable speed, like he was teleporting, heading towards the distant desolate plain. The 49 great plains of the Saints' world were tremendous continents that hovered in outer space. Every single plain was extremely far away from each other. Usually, interplanar travel between 2 places would be done through space battleships or teleportation formations. However, at the heaven-splitting ancestor's level of cultivation, he possessed a partial grasp over the heavenly ways and the ability to interfere with the laws. The distance between planes was nothing in his eyes. The speed at which he traveled through the starry sky was even faster than a teleportation formation that could cross continents. The heaven-splitting ancestor was not the only peak expert who sensed what was happening on the desolate plain. At this moment, on the 49 great plains and 81 great planets of the Saints' world, a few old antiques who spent most of their time in life or death seclusion, ignoring the matters of the world, or even becoming indifferent to fame and fortune, roused from their meditation. Their eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of time. They had seen through life, death, and samsara. They were indifferent to fame and fortune and had transcended the world. It's the strongest of the three dark gold kings of the ancient great apes, Gusta. Gusta's body and essence blood are actually on the desolate plain. The bloodline of a dark gold king is extremely precious and rare. Gusta was the strongest of the ancient great apes, and he was only a step away from becoming a grand exalt. His essence blood might contain some of his memories from when he was alive. Gusta's body and essence blood. It's worth a personal trip. The old antiques hidden in various places of the saint's world all emerged from where they sat. They moved through outer space, hurrying towards the desolate plain. The celestial sword saint remained seated like a meditating monk on the sword god mountains. His gaze pierced through space as he stared at Gusta's body and blood that had been carried into the sky by the streams of energy. He was cold and indifferent. However, a formless sword will emanated from his body, enveloping the entire sword god peak. It allowed the sword god peak to remain unscathed amidst the tremors that shook the entire barren state. In the imperial capital of the Violet Wind Empire, one of the 5 everlasting empires, a disheveled old man with messy hair and old clothes leaned against a chair with a few soldiers from the Violet Wind Empire. He lay on a wrought-tan chair, lazily with his eyes closed beside a teleportation formation that had been sealed off by a formation. The disheveled old man seemed to be an infinite prime on the surface. He held an important position in the Violet Wind Empire, under orders to protect the teleportation formation. At this moment, the ground shook violently, and the disheveled old man suddenly stood up. He looked in the direction of the War Dragon Empire, and a smear of surprise appeared in his eyes. He said with a voice that only he could hear, "Gusta's body is actually buried in the depths of the desolate plain. I've stayed on the desolate plain for several 100,000 years, yet I didn't know anything about it." The disheveled old man's gaze became extremely deep. Just when he was about to hurry over, he seemed to sense something, and his face immediately changed slightly. He became cautious as he murmured, "I can sense a sliver of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's presence." So that's what it is. The Blood Tier Grand Exalt has actually set up traps there secretly. I can't touch it. I can't touch it. This kid, Jianshin, is far too crazy. He actually destroyed the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's traps. Let's see who can save him now. At the same time, the heaven-splitting ancestor who hurried towards the desolate plain seemed to sense something. He suddenly stopped and stared at the distant desolate plain as he frowned. There's a sliver of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's presence. The heaven-splitting ancestor murmured. Endless ways seemed to intersect in his eyes as he divined. A while later, he decisively gave up on going to the desolate plain. He turned around and returned to the heaven-splitting clan. At the same time, the old antiques who hurried towards the desolate plain from various parts of the saint's world all stopped in the sea of stars. A while later, they all gave up on going to the desolate plain. They returned the way they came with sighs and regret. Many experts approached the location of the explosion on the desolate plain. They came from various places. There were infinite primes and chaotic primes among them. At that moment, basically half of all the primordial realm experts on the desolate plain had gathered there. Whose corpse is this? It's actually so powerful. Just the energy within a droplet of blood is enough to make me shiver in fear. An infinite prime paled in fright as he stared at the blood in the sky. The blood contains extremely pure energy. It's of an extremely high level, and its value is immeasurable. A chaotic prime cried out as greed filled his eyes. He immediately began to collect it, collecting a droplet of blood nearby into a jade bottle. The other primordial realm experts did not hesitate when they saw someone take action. They all began to collect Gusta's blood and fragments of his body with burning excitement. All of their attention was drawn away by the blood in the sky. They failed to notice a fist-sized tower that stuck close to the ground and flew off into the distance silently. After traveling far away, the damaged tower stopped in a hidden place. Afterwards, it vanished and Jianshun and Kea appeared out of nowhere. "Let's go. Let's leave this place," Jianshun called out. He did not continue to travel with the Inata Tower, as he was too big of a target and would be discovered very easily. Instead, he chose to travel with Kea through the air. The reason why he chose to travel with Kea was because the peak experts had already seen him travel alone. If he continued to travel alone, even if Mo Tianyan's mask could conceal his presence and change his appearance, the chances of him being suspected were very high. However, very few people knew about Kea's existence, so he chose to travel with Kea. The two of them could catch people off guard and reduce the chances of them being suspected. As for the blood medallion that was used to verify identities on the desolate plain, it had been removed in the past 3 years when Jianshun's identity was exposed and he was cultivating in the Sword God Mountains. After all, the appearance of the blood medallion was only a way to search for Jianshun. It was not a rule that had been passed down on the desolate plain, so it obviously would not remain in place for long. At this moment, several dozen furious presences suddenly erupted from underground. The peak experts that Jianshun had lured into the cavern all shot into the air furiously in horrible shape. They hovered in the air as they roared out. They were all peak experts with great cultivations. The terrifying shockwaves of energy had only injured them to a certain extent and reduced them to a horrible shape. It was not enough to actually kill them. After all, they had only endured the shockwaves and not a direct attack from the 8 experts. Jianshun, the old man will never let you off so easily. 2. Sam was also covered in blood. He hovered in the air with a pale face as he gritted his teeth. Afterwards, the terrifying senses of the soul flooded out from the peak experts. All of them were searching for Jianshun. At this moment, Jianshun and Kea flew through the air at a steady pace 10 million kilometers away. The terrifying senses of the souls from the peak experts swept past them, but they did not discover anything. This was because Jianshun had already controlled the mask and changed his appearance. Even his figure and physique had changed.